The horrible James Bulger case. On February 12, 1993, a Friday afternoon in Bootle, England, specifically at the New Strand Shopping Centre, Denise was with a friend and her son, James Bulger. James had recently stopped using a stroller, as he was 2 years and 10 months old, so he was walking alongside his mother. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Denise's friend took a different path, leaving Denise alone with her little James. At one point, Denise went to a store with her son, bought what she needed, and when she realized it, she saw that James was not with her. It was only a momentary distraction for a few seconds as she checked her purse, but this oversight would change their lives forever. We all have memories of getting separated from family members in the shopping center as children, so the response here was quite common. When Denise left the store, she reunited with her friend, who had just passed by the front of the shop, but she didn't see James anywhere. They assumed he had wandered off, so they began asking the mall security guards and anyone they encountered if they had seen the child. Soon, announcements were made over the mall speakers, inquiring about James, and as desperation mounted, several police patrols combed the area until nightfall. Yet there was still no sign of James. The next step for the police was to review the shopping center's security cameras, as it was their only hope of discovering what had happened that afternoon with James. It was 1993, and security cameras had limited resolution at that time, and this particular shopping center didn't have many of them. However, one camera happened to be pointed at the store. The footage showed James leaving through the door, and Denise's lapse in attention was indeed brief, as within a minute she could be seen searching for James at the door. But by then, it was already too late. The next trace of James was captured by one of the overhead cameras, showing him following two individuals. What was unusual was that these two individuals appeared to be teenagers, seemingly between the ages of 14 and 18. In the final image of James, he was seen leaving the shopping center with one of these boys holding his hand. Initially, there was hope, with the court thinking that these young boys wouldn't be capable of harming little James. However, 2 days later, the truth would come to light. More than 4 kilometers away from the shopping center, while playing, some teenagers stumbled upon the remains of a child on the train tracks, who had apparently been struck by a train. This discovery immediately set off alarms, and they contacted one of James' uncles, who unmistakably identified the child as James Bulger. It was clear that this was no accident. In fact, all evidence suggested that James had died before being struck by the train. His body bore so many injuries that investigators couldn't determine the exact cause of his death. There were 2 more unsettling details. He had a pair of batteries in his mouth, and his left eye had been eerily painted blue. It was as if his young body had been subjected to inhumane experimentation, and the crime scene would remain etched in the memory of all the officers present as one of the most horrifying scenes they had ever encountered in their careers. The local community was in shock and outrage over the tragic incident. Many expressed their heartfelt condolences to the family, particularly Denise. While she had a momentary lapse of attention, it was a mistake anyone could make, and those with empathy could understand the immense pain she was going through. She replayed in her mind daily the haunting thought that she might have saved her son had she been more vigilant at that moment. In addition to the sympathy, there were some individuals, including her own husband at one point, who angrily confronted her and blamed her for not being attentive enough, asserting that the tragedy could have been prevented with more careful supervision. The potential key to identifying the culprit lay in the shopping center's security cameras, but their image quality was so poor that even determining the suspects' ages was impossible. Various media outlets attempted to enhance the images in hopes of identifying the individuals, but their efforts proved fruitless. The last glimmer of hope rested on someone coming forward to confess to the crime. On February 16, just 2 days after Jane's body was discovered, the police received a crucial call. The caller accused a 12-year-old boy named Jonathan Green of being the perpetrator, and shockingly, this accusation came from his own parents. They claimed that their son bore a resemblance to one of the suspects captured in the security camera footage, a grave accusation indeed when it comes from one's own parents. Law enforcement took this accusation seriously and subjected Jonathan to nearly 23 hours of relentless interrogation before eventually declaring him innocent. In a subsequent interview, Jonathan revealed the profound psychological trauma he endured during this time, spending countless sleepless nights. The intensity of the questioning even tempted him to falsely admit guilt at one point. The parents, however, did not hesitate much before making the accusation, even though the images they based it on were captured just days earlier. Furthermore, Jonathan was a mere 12 years old, and giving him the benefit of the doubt should have been a priority. The only evidence against him was a vague resemblance, which wasn't particularly strong given the poor image quality, akin to images taken through a blender. The media, driven by the pursuit of attention, without much consideration, broadcasted Jonathan as the prime suspect. This prompted people, fueled by a thirst for justice, to attack the vehicle in which he traveled with his parents and to vandalize their home by pelting it with stones until all the windows were shattered. The harassment was so severe that the Greens had to abandon their home and relocate to another city. Just 6 days after Jane's disappearance, a television program showed all available information about the case up to that date, hoping that a viewer might provide a clue to apprehend the culprits. The program was immensely popular at the time, and following its broadcast, the police received several calls, with one call standing out as particularly valuable. It came from a woman who firmly believed that the real culprits were Robert Thompson and John Venables. These boys were known for their mischievous behavior, which had escalated into criminal activities such as theft. They had gained a notorious reputation at their schools and were frequent truants. However, a significant conflict arose when the police suspected that the culprits were at least 14 years old, while these potential suspects were just 10 years old. Due to this discrepancy and the fact that there were several other suspects of similar age, the police decided to pay a visit to the homes of these young boys, although their expectations were not high. Initially, they observed some peculiar behavior, but it was challenging to draw definitive conclusions from these observations since the police had very little experience dealing with child offenders of this age. Subsequently, it was confirmed that both boys had skipped school on that particular day. Additionally, there was a noticeable detail. One of John's shoes displayed clear stains of blue paint. This piece of evidence led the authorities to consider them as prime suspects, and they were promptly taken to the police station. Unlike the previous case with Jonathan, this time the authorities handled it discreetly to prevent the young boys from enduring the extensive hours of questioning in a single session. Consequently, the interrogations were spread out over multiple days. The initial day of questioning proved to be challenging, given the boys' age of just 10, and the authorities couldn't subject them to the same scrutiny as adults. As a result, both boys steadfastly denied any involvement in the crime, and their age and emotional state played a significant role in this response. However, as the interrogations continued into the second day, a marked contrast emerged between Robert and John. Robert remained composed, displaying little emotion, not shedding a tear, and maintaining a stoic demeanor. On the other hand, John's emotional resilience began to waver, and he eventually confessed to the crime. John revealed that on that fateful afternoon, he and Robert had decided to skip school as they often did and ventured to the shopping center. Their initial actions upon arrival included stealing various items, among them a pair of batteries and a can of blue paint. Growing weary of their theft spree, a sinister idea took hold in their young minds. The idea of kidnapping a child. They planned to take the child onto the street and push them in front of an oncoming car. To execute this plan, they first signaled to another child to approach them. Fortunately, the child's vigilant mother intervened in time, preventing any harm. Continuing with their disturbing plan, as they passed by a butcher shop, they signaled to James Bulger through the window. Tragically, James responded to their call and left the shop, unbeknownst to his mother. The two boys quickly whisked James away from the shopping center to carry out their dark scheme. However, James, with his remarkable balance, made it challenging for them to push him far enough onto the road for a car to strike him. Undeterred, they decided to take James to a nearby canal, intending to push him in and drown him. Upon reaching the canal, they pushed him from above, but instead of falling into the water, James tumbled and struck his forehead, resulting in a visible bump. His cries for help filled the air. It is estimated that approximately 38 individuals witnessed these two boys with James, and a few inquired about their actions. Initially, one of the boys falsely claimed that they were brothers, which caused frustration among those who witnessed the incident. It is important to note that the onlookers faced a challenging situation involving children who appeared innocent, making intervention at the time more complex. However, what remains alarming and subject to criticism is the false explanation provided by John and Robert to one individual, stating that James was a lost child, and they were taking him to a police station. At that point, an adult had to be held accountable because this tragic incident could have been prevented. It's clearly irresponsible to entrust the care of a lost child to two 10-year-olds. After walking for more than 4 kilometers, the boys took James to a remote railway track, devoid of any witnesses, and carried out unspeakable acts that are too gruesome to detail. They utilized whatever items they could find, including bricks, stones, and even a hefty 10-kilogram metal bar, inflicting unimaginable suffering upon James. When he lay lifeless, their intentions were unclear, whether to stage it as an accident or to inflict further harm on this young life. They left his lifeless body on the railway track, concealed beneath debris, to remain unnoticed until a passing train. Even the police found it difficult to comprehend such a horrifying reality, and they believed that there must have been prior signs or indicators. Consequently, they decided to delve into the backgrounds of these two young boys. As the police investigation continued, it became evident that both boys had experienced remarkably similar childhoods. Robert Thompson resided in a dysfunctional household where he and his 6 siblings suffered constant abuse from their father. His mother grappled with severe alcohol-related issues and had once attempted suicide while setting their home on fire. Robert had earned a reputation as a thief, displaying violent tendencies and compulsive lying. John Venables, on the other hand, came from a fractured family where his parents were divorced, and he received minimal attention and affection. Coupled with his short temper, John often engaged in mischief and fights to garner attention, eventually leading to his expulsion from school. It's widely believed that Robert took on the role of the ringleader during their terrible actions. Throughout the interrogations, both boys attempted to shift blame onto each other. Robert, displaying a shrewd demeanor, would acknowledge his presence but claim that he left when he saw John beginning to torment James on the railway tracks. When confronted with questions that cornered him, he would feign tears without shedding a single drop. However, the presence of blood and strands of James' hair on his clothing, particularly his shoes, served as irrefutable evidence of his involvement. Consequently, on February 20, both were declared guilty, identified only as Boy A and Boy B to circumvent potential issues similar to those faced by Jonathan Green. It was known only that they were two 10-year-old boys residing in Walton. This case was a recipe for turmoil. The brutal murder of a child as innocent as a 2-year-old had shaken the community, evoking tears and profound anger. The sentiment was so intense that it practically condemned the perpetrators to a life in hiding if they ever ventured into the public sphere. Yet, these culprits were merely children of 10, making any sentencing decision the subject of heated controversy. There was a significant divide in public opinion regarding the appropriate punishment for John Venables and Robert Thompson. While some called for the death penalty, others believed that a regular prison sentence would suffice. The debate also centered around the issue of anonymity. Why should these boys be shielded from public exposure when other murderers were not afforded the same privilege? Revealing their real names would effectively have been a death sentence, erasing all the efforts invested in their psychological rehabilitation. However, some may argue that if they didn't afford James a chance to live, why should they be allowed to live freely? When the trial started, the parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats. The full trial opened at Sessions House, Preston, on 1 November 1993, conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock away from their parents, and the judge and court officials in legal regalia. The boys denied the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. James's mother, devastated by the loss of her son, could only muster the strength to attend the day of the verdict. It wasn't until the sentencing that the judge permitted the media to publish the faces of Robert and John, who had shown no remorse throughout the 17-day trial. The evidence presented indicated that both boys understood the difference between right and wrong. John's tears seemed to stem from the anticipation of their impending fate, while Robert remained emotionally detached. With this knowledge in mind, on November 24, 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, initially facing a minimum of 15 years in prison, received a different sentence. They were to be held in a juvenile detention center until they turned 18, avoiding a real prison experience. This decision disappointed the public to the extent that riots erupted and vehicles believed to be carrying the boys were vandalized. However, these vehicles were decoys, and the boys were transported discreetly in other vehicles. From that point onward, they were granted new identities, shrouded in secrecy, known only to the authorities tasked with monitoring their lives. Initially, public outrage soared when news broke that the government had allocated £1.5 million, roughly equivalent to $2 million, for the rehabilitation of these young boys. This sparked a moral dilemma, as many argued that this substantial sum could have been better spent on saving innocent children, providing them with essential medications and sustenance. After all, this money came from hard-working taxpayers who weren't keen on supporting these boys financially. Some demanded a minimum prison sentence of 15 years for the young offenders, and this demand held some validity. Despite the expertise of psychologists, it's well established that by the age of 18, an individual's brain hasn't fully matured and latent issues may surface. Allowing potentially dangerous individuals to exit psychological support at this age was seen as a considerable risk. In June 2001, both boys were released, and their anonymity would only be lifted if they committed another crime. Interestingly, Robert, who initially appeared more problematic, managed to stay clear of criminal activity. On the contrary, John's behavior took a different turn, becoming a focal point for those questioning the efficacy of the system and how such individuals could be allowed to reintegrate into society. John's criminal history began with a brief jail sentence in 2008 for instigating a bar brawl and being found in possession of drugs. In 2010, he faced arrest for possessing indecent images related to child abuse. Subsequently, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison after confessing to downloading and disseminating such content online. Although he was released in 2013, he returned to jail in 2017 on the same charges. This time, he received a 40-month prison term after admitting to possessing over 1,000 explicit images. The exact details of his release and subsequent actions remain unclear, as authorities, seemingly regardless of his actions, continue to shield him from public scrutiny. Even 2 decades after the initial crime, John managed to claim another victim, 36-year-old Scott Bradley. Scott, a family man, fell prey to false rumors that he was, in fact, Robert Thompson. Over several months, he endured relentless harassment, insults, and threats directed at his family, and most importantly, his beloved son. During one phone call, he confided in his mother, expressing his unbearable distress and a desire to end his own life. Regrettably, she didn't take his words seriously, assuming the situation would eventually subside. Tragically, on August 10, 2012, Scott Bradley's mother discovered her son's lifeless body hanging from a noose. When authorities arrived at the scene, they determined it was a case of suicide. The mother of James Bulger, along with countless others, couldn't help but wonder if this tragedy might have been averted had the true identities of the original perpetrators been revealed. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered resettling Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high cost behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had reportedly spent £65,000 in legal fees to keep Venables' identity a secret. Caroline Warmis was born on January 8, 1964, in the state of Michigan, USA. Her father, Tom Warmis, was what is often called a self-made millionaire, meaning his wealth wasn't inherited but earned through his work in the insurance industry. To give you an idea of his success, a March 1990 article in New York Magazine detailed Tom's assets, which included 8 private jets, 2 yachts, 15 luxury cars, and multiple homes. At that time, his net worth was estimated at around $150 million. Caroline was the first of 3 children born to Tom Warmis and Elizabeth, about whom little is known. Growing up, Caroline and her siblings had everything they could wish for, attending the best private schools and enjoying all the privileges that come with wealth. However, money couldn't buy happiness or stability in their family. When Caroline was 8 years old in 1972, her parents' marriage ended in a contentious and prolonged divorce. Caroline and her younger siblings, a brother and a sister, were drawn into a lengthy legal battle that eventually awarded custody of the children to their mother, Elizabeth. After the divorce, Caroline's relationship with her father grew increasingly distant. Though Tom continued to provide financial support, he was not an actively involved parent. Beyond these familial challenges, Caroline's early years were relatively uneventful. Those who knew her described her as a quiet, shy, and kind young woman. One anonymous source even called her the kind of girl you'd introduce to your mother. However, those closer to her, particularly her sister's friends, noted that Caroline often exhibited a competitive streak, especially toward her younger sister. This competitive nature and her difficulties in forming healthy relationships became more apparent after she graduated from high school and started college. Caroline attended the University of Michigan, where she began studying psychology. During this time, her life was marked by a series of romantic relationships, the most significant of which was with Paul Lavin in 1983. Caroline met Paul at the university, where he worked as an assistant professor in one of her classes. While details about their relationship are scarce, it's known that their breakup had a profound impact on Caroline. When Paul left her to get engaged to another student, Caroline became obsessed. She harassed the couple with incessant phone calls, left disturbing voicemail messages, stalked Paul at work, and even broke into the couple's shared apartment. On more than one occasion, the police had to be called to remove her from the premises. The situation was alarming, and Paul and his fiancée were so concerned that they sought a restraining order against Caroline, fearing she might crash their wedding, which was set for July 1984. Despite legal intervention, Caroline continued her harassment, even after Paul's fiancée became his wife. Her obsession was so intense that she spent months studying with a rabbi to convert to Judaism, hoping it might win Paul back. Friends of Caroline recalled this period as one of the darkest in her life. Some were so worried about her mental state that they feared she might attempt suicide, though there is no record of her actually trying to end her life. Despite the turmoil, Caroline eventually managed to move past the breakup, refocusing on her studies and ultimately graduating with a degree in psychology from the University of Michigan. In 1987, with her undergraduate degree in hand, Caroline decided to pursue a master's degree at Columbia University, which required her to move to New York City. During her early months there, she became involved with a married man named Jim Russo. Her obsession with him mirrored her earlier fixation on Paul. This time, Caroline went so far as to hire a private investigator to follow and monitor Jim's activities. Caroline was determined to end Jim Russo's marriage and hoped that the private investigator she hired could capture compromising photos of her former lover with another woman. However, when the investigator reported that he hadn't been able to obtain any incriminating photos, Caroline went as far as to suggest that he fabricate them. Despite her obsession, by September of that year, Caroline had completed her master's degree and secured a job as a computer teacher at Greenville Elementary School, located in Greenburgh, a residential suburb of New York. It was here that she met Paul Solomon, a 40-year-old fifth-grade teacher at the school. Not only was Paul 17 years older than Caroline, but he was also married for nearly 20 years to a woman named Betty Jean, with whom he had a 13-year-old daughter, Kristen, who attended the same school where Caroline and Paul taught. Despite these obstacles, Caroline and Paul began a romantic relationship. She confided to those around her that Paul's marriage was on the brink of ending. According to her, Solomon was merely waiting for his daughter to graduate before separating from Betty. Whether Paul truly had such intentions is unclear, but it seems his marriage was indeed troubled. Both he and Betty had engaged in extramarital affairs, and their relationship was far from ideal. According to Betty's mother, Paul was extremely controlling, possessive, and jealous, which had caused Betty Jean to become increasingly withdrawn and isolated over the years. By the late 1980s, Betty had even started contemplating divorce, possibly influenced by the presence of Caroline in their lives. Betty was unaware of the true nature of Caroline's relationship with her husband, thinking of her merely as a friend of the family. For instance, Kristen recalled in court the first time she met Caroline. It happened after school one day when her father was helping her and her basketball team with practice. Without prior invitation, Caroline joined the game as if she belonged there. In the months that followed, Caroline's presence became more frequent. She attended all of Kristen's games, joined the family and another teacher at a Christmas show in Manhattan, and constantly asked Kristen if her mother liked her. Caroline was desperate to be accepted into the Solomon family circle. Though their affair continued, Paul eventually asked Caroline to stop interacting with his family, following an incident that had deeply unsettled him. In August 1988, when Kristen turned 16, Caroline sent 2 extravagant gifts to the Solomon home: 2 designer outfits and a Tiffany bracelet. These gifts were excessive, especially considering Caroline barely knew the teenager, and even more so given that Paul had explicitly told her to stay away from his wife and daughter. Despite this, Paul didn't end their relationship. They continued seeing each other even after Caroline left Greenville Elementary School. As time went on, Paul showed no signs of leaving Betty, instead remaining committed to his marriage. For some, This was the trigger for the events of February 1989. Others speculate that around that time, Paul might have attempted to break things off with Caroline, who was then 25 years old. Whatever the reason, these events would change the lives of the Solomons and Caroline forever. On the night of February 15, 1989, at precisely 11:42 p.m., the police in Scarsdale, a city close to Greenburgh where the Solomon family lived, received a frantic call from Paul Solomon. He was so distraught that he mistakenly dialed the wrong police department, forcing the dispatcher to transfer his call to the Greenburgh police. When officers finally arrived at the Solomon residence, they found Paul still in shock and the scene gruesome. In the middle of the living room floor, lying in a pool of fresh blood, was Betty, face down with multiple gunshot wounds to her back and leg. Initial assessments of the crime scene revealed no signs of forced entry through the windows or doors. The room where Betty's body was found was undisturbed, with nothing out of place or stolen, leading investigators to conclude that robbery was not the motive. A preliminary forensic examination of Betty's body determined that she had been shot at least 8 times, with 6 shell casings found in the living room. In cases where the victim is found by their spouse, the first line of investigation typically focuses on the possibility of domestic violence. Naturally, Paul Solomon became the prime suspect and person of interest. He was the first to be questioned, giving his account at the crime scene and then repeatedly at the police station in the following days. Each time, Paul's story remained consistent, without any discrepancies that might suggest he was lying. Moreover, his alibi was solid and verifiable. That evening, Paul left his home and drove to a bowling alley located about 5 miles from his house. He parked his car and entered the venue, which he frequented often. Upon arrival, he went straight to a group of people who were already playing, greeted them, and joined their table. This was the initial version of events that Paul shared with the detectives handling the case, but he left out a significant portion of his plans for that night. During his first visit to the police station, Paul added crucial information he had previously omitted. Around 7:15 p.m., after receiving a phone call, he abruptly left the bowling alley without saying goodbye or explaining why. From there, Paul drove to the Holiday Inn, a hotel located in Yonkers, a city not far from where he was. His destination was the Treetops restaurant within the hotel. At approximately 7:45 p.m., his lover, Caroline Warmis, entered the restaurant and joined him. They had dinner together and shared several drinks. After their meal, Paul paid the bill, and the couple, who had arrived separately, left the restaurant together. They headed to the parking lot, specifically to Caroline's car, where they engaged in sexual activity. Afterward, Paul returned to his car and began the drive back to his home, while Caroline took the route to her apartment in Manhattan. Naturally, the first thing the police did was verify Paul's story. Indeed, Paul had been seen at the places he claimed to have been. The only discrepancy was in the timing. There was a slight difference between the hours Paul reported and the actual events. However, this difference was only a matter of minutes, making it inconsequential and not altering the facts. The police decided to investigate Caroline by calling her in for questioning. The then 25-year-old agreed to come to the station, but upon arrival she refused to speak without her lawyer present. This, combined with her history of obsessive behavior toward former lovers, made her incredibly suspicious to the detectives. However, suspicion alone did not make her the killer. Despite their doubts about Caroline and her behavior, the police had no concrete evidence linking her to the crime scene or justifying the continuation of the investigation. As a result, the case began to cool down until April and May of 1989. It was then that the police obtained a warrant to review Caroline Warmis's phone records, focusing on calls made before and after the crime. Through this analysis, they discovered a number Caroline had called repeatedly before February 15th, the day of the murder. The number belonged to the private investigator Caroline had previously hired to track one of her lovers, take photos, and essentially stalk him. When the police spoke with the investigator, he admitted that Caroline was indeed a client of his and recounted the work he had done for her in the past. However, he claimed that he hadn't done any other jobs for her and that Caroline would contact him just to chat and keep in touch. Despite his story, it seemed weak and constructed. Every time he was asked to repeat it, there were significant changes in how he told it. Under pressure and the threat of jail time for obstructing a criminal investigation and engaging in illegal activities, he eventually revealed the truth. He testified that the day before the crime, Caroline had called him to ask how she could obtain a gun. According to her, she needed it for her own safety. The investigator later testified in court that Warmis was in a hurry to get a gun, frequently calling to insist on his help. She not only wanted a gun, but also a silencer to go with it. Initially, the private investigator refused her request, but after constant pressure and an offer of $2,500, he finally agreed. In January 1989, the investigator sold her a semi-automatic revolver complete with a silencer. The gun had been a gift the investigator had received from a friend, and the silencer had been custom-made for the revolver by another friend who owned a gun shop in Brooklyn. The police were able to confirm the investigator's entire account. There was no doubt that the weapon he had sold to Caroline Warmis was the same one used to murder Betty Solomon. Additionally, the detective who was leading the case discovered that the phone records showed calls between Caroline and the investigator on the day she received the weapon, January 15, 1989. Surprisingly, Caroline had made a call from her Manhattan apartment to Raceport Shop, a store located over 20 miles from her home. The police decided to review the sales records from the day Betty was murdered, as the store sold ammunition for various firearms. They discovered that on February 15th, 3 sales of ammunition had been made. Since such transactions are always documented, it was easy to identify the purchasers. 2 were men, and the third was a woman named Lisa, who had shown her New York driver's license. Naturally, the police tracked down Lisa to speak with her. Lisa adamantly denied ever visiting Raceport Shop in Yonkers, let alone purchasing ammunition there. She also claimed that she didn't even have her driver's license at the time, as it had gone missing during the summer while she was working. She wasn't sure whether it had been stolen or simply lost. But the most intriguing part? She added that during her summer job, she had worked alongside a woman named Caroline Warmis. Things were starting to fall into place. Caroline had legally purchased a gun through the private investigator, matching the characteristics of the murder weapon. She had also called a store in Yonkers to ensure they had the correct ammunition for her revolver and then drove over 20 miles to purchase bullets, a rather suspicious act. Moreover, she had used a driver's license that didn't belong to her, an ID that had been lost by her summer co-worker. The coincidences were piling up, all pointing toward Caroline as the prime suspect. On February 2, 1990, with the case now gaining public attention and significant media interest, Caroline Warmis was officially charged with second-degree murder, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. Caroline was taken into custody, and her bail was set at $250,000. By this time, nearly a year after the crime, the case had become widely known. For instance, HBO had already produced 2 documentary films about it, and various media outlets portrayed Caroline as either a femme fatale or a cold, ruthless killer devoid of compassion. As expected, the trial garnered massive media coverage. On January 14, 1991, nearly 2 years after Betty Solomon's death, the trial began in White Plains, New York. Witnesses included the private investigator, Paul Solomon, and his daughter, in addition to the evidence mentioned earlier. The prosecution presented a crucial piece of evidence, a call Betty made to 911 at around 7:15 p.m. on the night of the murder. The call lasted only seconds, during which Betty was heard saying, "He or she is trying to kill me." However, the 911 operator couldn't determine if she was referring to a male or female attacker, and the call was abruptly cut off before further questions could be asked. Due to a mix-up in the phone records, the police were initially dispatched to the wrong address, delaying their response to the Solomon home. Caroline's defense attorney argued that the evidence was not only circumstantial but also presented with a bias meant to frame his client. He also claimed that the private investigator had been hired by Paul Solomon to fabricate evidence against Warmis. The first trial lasted about 3 months and concluded after 12 days of jury deliberation. The jury was split in favor of convicting Caroline but couldn't reach the necessary unanimous verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial on April 27th of that year. In January 1992, a second trial began, during which the prosecution introduced new evidence, a black glove with blood that allegedly belonged to Caroline. This glove had been previously dismissed as evidence by the police, but was mysteriously allowed into the case between the first and second trials, a move that the defense repeatedly questioned and criticized. This trial also lasted 3 months, with the verdict delivered on May 27, 1992. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Caroline guilty of second-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. On June 26, 1992, the judge, who had presided over both trials, sentenced Caroline Warmis to a maximum of 25 years in prison for the murder and an additional 5 to 15 years for the weapons charge, to be served concurrently. After her sentencing, Caroline spoke publicly for the first time during the trials, maintaining her innocence, a stance she held throughout her time in prison. Her time in prison was reportedly tumultuous, with multiple conflicts involving other inmates and correctional officers. Caroline applied for parole several times but was denied in 2016, 2017, and 2018. It wasn't until her fourth attempt in 2019 that she was finally granted parole. Even today, Caroline continues to assert her innocence, claiming that Paul Solomon orchestrated her downfall to ensure she would be imprisoned. She occasionally appears in documentary specials about her case, maintaining that she was wrongfully convicted. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in the county of Rhondda, England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies, who were also the proud parents of another girl named Anna. The family was settled in a small community mainly formed by socially purposed housing. There, against the backdrop of beautiful mountain scenery, Lucy had a particularly happy childhood. Since she and her little sister had similar tastes, they were always very close. Her parents always highlighted Lucy's infectious joy as a standout quality. During her time in primary school, Lucy was known for her outgoing and likable temperament, which immediately endeared her to teachers and classmates alike. In addition to her charming personality, she was also recognized for her undeniable beauty, making her one of the most popular and admired girls at school. Regarding interests outside of academics, both she and Anna loved ponies. Knowing this, their father pleasantly surprised them by enrolling both in the local riding club. This sporting activity taught them discipline and also showcased their talent. Consequently, they earned the right to participate and represent the club in countless events and competitions. Thus, by the start of secondary school, Lucy shone as an exceptional rider. However, her energy and passion were not limited to the tracks, as the versatile young lady began to take flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice to master both instruments. Her efforts soon paid off, and by the following year, Lucy had a very comprehensive and detailed mastery of the wide field of classical music. Thanks to this, she was accepted into a youth orchestra and also joined her school's choir group. As often happens in this stage of adolescence, a healthy romantic interest appeared in her life, and Lucy became very close to Gareth Jenkins. However, she preferred to keep it a secret. In 1989, after finishing secondary school, Lucy was determined to pursue a career in the musical world. With that goal in mind, she enrolled to undertake a bachelor's degree at the University of Warwick. There, she began her new and promising life, always with the aspiration of becoming a teacher and dedicating herself to musical education. But things did not go as she had expected. While her passion remained, she did not enjoy the direction of the degree program. Consequently, she decided to switch her original plan and opted to study urban planning. It was around this time that she met Graham McAllister. They both discovered quite soon that their outlook on life was very similar. Aside from their love for art and shared interests, a crucial detail in their bond was the extravagant sense of humor that complemented each other. Their relationship flowed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce him to her parents. For Roger and Andrea, the meeting was wonderful, as they were certain that Graham was the right one for their daughter. So much so that they decided to buy Lucy a house in the city of Coventry, northwest of London. This gesture, in addition to ensuring her a life free from the upheavals of rent and moving, carried their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited her boyfriend to share the new home. As they continued with their studies in 1995, the young couple welcomed their first child, whom they named James. Lucy decided it was best to take a break from university to care for him. Meanwhile, Graham continued with his university commitments and, to support the household expenses, got a job working the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over the months, this dynamic began to affect Lucy, because alone at home, dedicated exclusively to the child, and with many hours away from her partner, a feeling of boredom took hold of her. Then, she found no better solution than to explore internet chat rooms for distraction. In this universe, she sought to meet new people. One night, while Lucy was immersed in lively conversations in various chat rooms, she came into contact with Harold Landry. At 53 years old and of American origin, Harold came from a financially struggling family in Louisiana. However, he understood early on that, being just one among a dozen siblings, he would have to achieve everything through his own effort and will. Thus, from a young age, he dedicated himself to hard work to escape poverty. His opportunity arrived when he realized that in the oil business, the key was not in owning a well, but in providing the essential infrastructure for the owners of such fields. Consequently, he founded his own company, focused exclusively on the design and manufacture of hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had anticipated, the business allowed him to amass a great fortune, eventually reaching billionaire status. By that time, he divided his time between his eccentric hobbies and a property on the island of Cozumel in Mexico. On a personal level, he had been married and divorced twice. From these unions, he had children whose exact number and identities are not publicly known. What was known, however, was that Harold made sure they lacked nothing. A particularly relevant event occurred in 1992 when, being single again, he met a married woman 20 years his junior. However, neither her family nor her husband were obstacles for Harold, who directed all his seductive strategy towards her and won her over. On February 6, 1994, Harold picked her up to take her for a ride in New Orleans. For this occasion, they hired a babysitter. After concluding the evening, Harold accompanied his lover back to her home and offered to take the babysitter back to hers. No one seemed concerned about the fact that the husband would find out about the betrayal and could act as a wounded man. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Outside the residence, the betrayed husband was monitoring every move of his wife. Once the third party said goodbye, he followed him in his car. A few minutes later, Harold finally noticed the vehicle tailing him. Then, almost as an instinctive gesture, he opened the glove compartment and pulled out the firearm he usually kept. When both stopped at a red light, things spiraled out of control, as the babysitter later narrated. Harold then brandished a revolver at the betrayed husband and fired. The bullet severed an artery in his neck and damaged a nerve leading to a vocal cord. The husband, called Chris Price, collapsed on the pavement with a wound on his neck, but fortunately, there was a hospital right in front of them, which allowed him to receive immediate aid, and the doctors were able to save his life. As for Harold, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The trial against him took place in 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney told the jury that Chris had only been the victim of a tragic and sordid affair. Regarding his client, he mentioned that he acted out of fear and in self-defense. The defense's clever strategy led the jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, to find Harold guilty of the lesser charge of aggravated assault. As a result, he was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. After appealing, Harold obtained probation. In exchange, he had to pay a fine of $500 and fulfill community service obligations. Although he sought to be completely exonerated, he thanked Pat for his hard work. Since then, they became great friends. Shortly after, Harold and Chris agreed on an undisclosed settlement amount. By the time Harold began talking with Lucy, he was residing in Covington and was still wealthy enough not to have to work. He was also honest about his occupations and everything related to his past life, including love affairs and legal details. But all these elements only served to increase Lucy's attraction to him. What followed was an engaging online romance, with Harold promising her a more than tempting lifestyle. His persistence and persuasive power bore fruit when Lucy finally asked Graham to end their relationship. Thus, he had the path clear, without a rival that could cause him trouble, as had happened with Chris. With the wind in his favor in the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet her, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents as her boyfriend. Although Roger and Andrea were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Feeling fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with her, Harold spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else Lucy desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he didn't want it to be just any proposal. He wished to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, he took her, along with her son James, and included Graham in the group on a trip. The chosen destination was Mexico, which for Harold was by then his favorite place in the world. Additionally, his longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. Nonetheless, his friend harbored certain suspicions about his future fiancée. Moreover, over the days, Pat found it strange that Lucy had dedicated a good part of her time in the company of Graham. He seemed to be completely blind to it, and ultimately, he proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly afterward, Harold surprised her by acquiring a $1 million property in an exclusive neighborhood in Worcestershire. In this rural setting, the marriage had a prosperous and peaceful start, further favored by the presence of excellent neighbors like Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom Harold and Lucy formed a lovely friendship. Soon, the newlyweds had their first daughter, whom they named Harriet. The event filled both Lucy and Harold with joy, and from then on, he dedicated himself to the little girl with undiminished energy and commitment. Equally important and affectionate was the relationship he maintained with James, whom he treated as if he were his own son. But relentless time began to erode their initial bliss. Gradually, the demands made towards Lucy increased, and her moodiness became directly proportional to her husband's demands. As he saw it, his wife was to constantly adjust to his preferences and adopt a submissive role to his requests. She, on the other hand, had different expectations, so tensions quickly became apparent. As a conclusion, Lucy was direct and unafraid to express her thoughts, and in this dynamic, her husband was not willing to yield. With both having volatile personalities, their arguments often culminated in explosive breakups, followed by reconciliation once the storm had passed. Thus, moments that had once been pleasurable, like the children's vacations, became increasingly marred by fights. Meanwhile, James witnessed the disintegration of his mother and stepfather's relationship. To their neighbors' dismay, the disputes that stretched on for hours became a sort of regular soundtrack. By that time, Rachel and Stephen were aware that the couple had a tendency to abuse alcohol, knowing well that this was the fuel that ignited their shouting and complaints. When Lucy and Harold unleashed all their anger, leading to prolonged periods of not speaking to each other, their neighbors felt peace return. In mid-2009, thanks to social media, Lucy reconnected with Gareth. Having had no contact since their platonic love in secondary school, they caught up and chatted for hours, with necessary interruptions due to both of their commitments. After Harold went to sleep, his wife stayed in front of the screen. Soon, it became evident to him that, feeling unhappy, his wife had resorted to the same escape route through which she had found him, and he had no doubt she was looking for a replacement. However, far from confronting her, he considered giving her some space and traveled to Mexico, where he stayed for a while. Meanwhile, Lucy took the opportunity to invite Gareth to stay with her. In the autumn of 2009, her husband returned to England, thinking this time would resolve their marriage. But as soon as he stepped into the house, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, he felt devastated. Then, after a few weeks, Harold began a relationship. He met this new woman online. She lived in the vicinity and went by the name of Rachel. Parallel to each of their new romances, the divorce negotiations were underway, and as often happens, new conflicts emerged. Especially concerning the house, Lucy expected to keep it to ensure a roof over her children's heads. For Harold, on the other hand, this matter was non-negotiable. His solution was to offer her money to buy herself a more modest apartment on her own. At the same time, he completely excluded her from his will. Upon learning of the decisions of her still husband, Lucy flew into a rage. Her feelings of hatred towards him made her share everything about Harold's past with her son James, not leaving anything out. Amidst the complicated process and considering the evident tension she was living in, Gareth invited her to spend a few days with him in Wales. Upon her return to familiar surroundings, Lucy no longer wished to disguise or hide her lengthy phone conversations with her new love. Meanwhile, both she and Harold were immersed in excessive alcohol consumption. The arguments escalated to unexpected heights, leaving the children at the mercy of a violent and unbearable atmosphere. On the afternoon of Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold drank several glasses of wine. At one point, he received a package intended for Stephen. Around 9 o'clock at night, when Stephen returned from work, he found a postal notification indicating that his parcel had been delivered to his neighbor. The Landry's lights were on, so he went there. Harold invited him in and served him a glass of wine. After greeting Lucy and exchanging a few words, Stephen noticed how drunk his host was. He took his package, excused himself, and left. Subsequently, the couple engaged in a nonsensical argument, specifically over a furniture purchase she was planning for their move. James acted as the years of fights had taught him. This time, the disagreement escalated to a physical altercation. In the scuffle, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil with which he struck Lucy on the cheek. Unable to continue avoiding the facts, James appeared at the scene of the dispute and found his mother injured. He immediately called the police and then focused on securing his younger sister's safety. Not long after, Lucy and her children left the house seeking help. The first place she thought to go was to Stephen's house. However, just as she headed in that direction, Harold caught up to her and, with a knife, caused her multiple injuries. Then he left her under a bush in the garden and walked away. Alerted by the screams, Stephen went outside. It only took him a few steps to discover his neighbor. Although he initially thought she was unconscious, he quickly understood the severity of the situation. At that moment, responding to the emergency call, the police arrived at the scene. They called the paramedics and searched the vicinity for the perpetrator. However, they only found the children, hidden and terrified in the backyard amidst the darkness. Once on site, the paramedics acted as quickly as possible, and Lucy was transported to the hospital. Very shortly after, her heart stopped. Meanwhile, Harold went to Rachel's house and confessed that something terrible had happened, but without giving further details. He then gave her 3 bank drafts totaling $40,000, a sum of cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. Then he set off back home. By that time, several police patrols were trying to locate him. Eventually, they found him walking along the road and proceeded to arrest him. Roger and Andrea were overwhelmed with despair upon hearing the tragic news. In a statement shared by the police, they asked for respect during their time of unimaginable sorrow from losing their daughter. For now, they had nothing more to say to the media. From then on, all their attention was focused on looking after their grandchildren. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy had died as a result of multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence and having James as a first-hand witness on February 5, 2010, Harold appeared before the court and was charged with murder. The trial took place in early February 2011. It was presided over by Judge David Foskett. On this occasion, Pat was not the defender of his friend. That task fell to attorney Andy Childs. Despite the evident difficulty of his task, the defense attorney argued that his client had been provoked by the fury of his wife, who left him no alternative but to act as he did. During his initial statements from the stand, Harold, amidst sobs, stated that he loved Lucy and regretted his actions. He then adhered to the strategy laid out by his lawyer, admitting to involuntary manslaughter because, in his words, Lucy had pushed him to the limit. To highlight the violence of the case, the prosecution presented a very detailed animation of the multiple injuries suffered by the victim. This presentation was shocking to those present in the courtroom. Finally, On February 24, 2011, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Harold Landry guilty of the murder of his wife, Lucy Landry, who was 38 years old at the time of her death, while Harold was 64. The following day was for the judge to impose the sentence. He had harsh words for Harold, whose attack he described as indescribable and unforgivable. He also dismissed Harold's claims of possible provocation by Lucy, considering them a vain attempt by the defendant to save himself. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before being eligible for parole. By that time, however, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones thanked not only for the resolution, but also for the judge's remarks, which they felt almost perfectly expressed what they themselves felt. They noted that the sentence somehow helped alleviate the pain of their loss, although they also admitted that no number of years in prison for Harold would bring back Lucy's life, so they would have to work on accepting this painful reality. For his part, Harold insisted on proclaiming his innocence, as he was heard saying he hoped to be able to appeal the sentence in the future. Morgan Chantel Mick was born to Morris and Colleen Nick in Ozark, Arkansas, on September 12, 1988. She was the couple's first child, and later, the family expanded with the birth of 2 more children. Morris was known to be a loving and kind father. Those who knew the couple said they embraced their parental responsibilities, doing everything in their power to make life easier for their children. Though Morris and Colleen initially seemed happy, challenges soon surfaced in their relationship. When Morgan was 6, they decided to separate, which ultimately led to a divorce. The process, however, was amicable, and they never fought over the custody of their children. The children primarily lived with Colleen, a devoted mother who always put her children first. Morgan and Colleen shared a close bond, spending most of their time together. Morgan excelled academically, despite her young age. Having just completed kindergarten, her family could already envision her thriving in elementary school. Personality-wise, Morgan was a shy child with a big heart. She loved apples and was fond of cats, leading her mother to allow her to have one as a pet. Despite her shyness, Morgan was actively involved as a Girl Scout and enjoyed playing with other kids. She dreamt of becoming a circus artist or a doctor when she grew up. On June 9, 1995, Colleen received an invitation from a friend to watch a minor league baseball game in Alma, Arkansas. Thinking Morgan might enjoy watching other kids play, she asked her to accompany her to the game, about 30 minutes away from their home. It was a night game, starting at 9 p.m. Upon arriving, the stands were already packed, but Colleen managed to find a spot for herself and Morgan. However, 6-year-old Morgan soon grew bored and began fidgeting with her shoelaces. Despite being a calm child, usually hesitant to engage with strangers, 2 older kids approached her. They introduced themselves as Jessica and Ty, aged 8 and 10 respectively. There are different accounts of what happened next. In one version, Morgan asked her mother if she could play with Jessica and Ty, but Colleen initially declined. Concerned about the unfamiliar surroundings and the packed venue of almost 300 people, Colleen was hesitant to let Morgan wander off. However, Colleen's friends urged her to let Morgan play, assuring her she was being overprotective and that Morgan would be fine. Eventually, Colleen relented. The kids mentioned wanting to run up a nearby hill to catch fireflies. With the game nearing its end around 10:30 p.m., Colleen allowed Morgan to go, but only for a short while. In another version, when Jessica and Ty invited Morgan to catch fireflies, Morgan's innate shyness made her decline. Yet Colleen's friends thought it would be good for Morgan to interact with other kids. Colleen then persuaded a reluctant Morgan to go with them, even if it meant leaving her mother's side. What's certain is Morgan left the stands with the two children. While Colleen tried to keep an eye on them, she got distracted when the baseball game ended and teams came into the stands to greet their families. The next time Colleen looked for the children, she saw Jessica and Ty returning without Morgan. Concerned, she immediately asked them about her daughter's whereabouts. They replied that the girl had disappeared while everyone was emptying sand from their shoes, leaning against Colleen's car. Subsequent investigations revealed that while Jessica and Ty sat at the front of the vehicle shaking out their shoes, Morgan was alone at the back emptying hers. Another significant and worrying detail was that the children insisted they saw a creepy man talking to Morgan before she vanished. Confused and anxious, Colleen immediately raised the alarm, and the adults present at the baseball field helped her search the nearby areas for her missing daughter. However, hours passed in the search without results, and Colleen decided to report the incident to the local police. Those who knew Colleen highlighted her kind nature and how she was always willing to help those in need. Therefore, when she needed support in searching for her child, many showed their solidarity. Additionally, being the devoted mother who always looked out for her children made the community even more outraged at the kidnapper or kidnappers who took Morgan away from her family. On the day she disappeared, Morgan was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Before going to the baseball game with her mother, she had attended her Girl Scouts activities and was wearing the organization's green shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. Another distinguishing feature of the young girl was that she had 5 silver crowns on her molars, a type of cap used to cover and protect a damaged tooth, which were easily visible. When the police were informed of the disappearance, they immediately began their investigation. Officers and local volunteers organized numerous search mobilizations, while detectives went door to door seeking evidence and witnesses. Since Jessica and Ty claimed to have seen a man speaking with Morgan before her disappearance, the police compiled a detailed description of the suspect, who was said to be between 23 and 38 years old with black hair sprinkled with gray, and he had a mustache and beard. Witnesses also reported seeing a faded red pickup truck nearby with a mismatched white camper shell that seemed too small by a couple of inches. They noticed possible damage to the back right corner of the vehicle. Some claimed the truck had Arkansas license plates, but the plate number wasn't recorded. Additionally, upon reviewing home videos recorded at the baseball field, investigators confirmed the existence of the suspect and the aforementioned red truck. However, unfortunately, the recordings were too grainy to provide a clear image of his face. Once Colleen reported Morgan's disappearance, she called her ex-husband and informed him of the situation. Morris seemed devastated by his daughter's disappearance and expressed willingness to cooperate with law enforcement. Surprisingly, during the initial investigation, the girl's father became a potential suspect as some evidence suggested he acted as a low-level drug dealer. He also reportedly had a criminal history, including assault and property damage charges. From the beginning of the investigation, Colleen was willing to cooperate with law enforcement in every way because her only wish was for her daughter to return safely. However, when investigators initially suspected Morris, her ex-husband, of being involved in Morgan's disappearance, she felt the police were making a grave mistake. She defended him, claiming he would never harm their children. Fortunately, the police soon ruled out Morris as a person of interest and focused their attention on Clifford Joe Pullen, rumored to be his drug supplier. This individual had a criminal record, and in addition to being arrested for marijuana possession, he had also been charged with first-degree rape of a minor in 1995, suggesting he might be capable of kidnapping. Nevertheless, authorities quickly cleared Clifford of any suspicion and stated he was not involved in Morgan's disappearance. Although the police received numerous leads at the time, none led to Morgan, and months, and then years went by. During this period, information from Albert Harvey, a resident of Stuttgart, Arkansas, seemed promising. He claimed he had seen a man fitting the suspect's description with a blonde child trying to enter his truck. Interestingly, Albert was able to identify the suspect from the sketch, and the police used all their resources to scour the area. However, as hours went by without any leads, law enforcement began to doubt his claims. They subjected Albert to 2 polygraph tests, which he failed, and he eventually admitted to lying. The case went cold, and as time passed, the search was no longer for his 6-year-old girl, so the existing photos of Morgan seemed insufficient. To provide a solution, in February 2001, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age-progressed photo showing what Morgan might look like at 12 years old. The intention behind such photographs was to widely disseminate an updated image of Morgan. This way, if someone spotted a teenager resembling the image, they could alert authorities to verify it if she was the girl abducted in 1995. Leads in the case were dwindling. Although police vowed that they wouldn't stop working the case until they found Morgan, the trail was growing cold. Searches would continue to be held sporadically, and detectives still followed up on every tip they received, but nothing brought them any closer to finding Morgan. The next lead came in January 2002, when a tip led investigators to search a property in Logan County, Arkansas. A witness claimed that Morgan was buried there. This testimony was so detailed and specific that the police acted on it. However, despite using search dogs and scouring the area thoroughly, nothing was found. On August 14, 2005, ABC's Extreme Makeover, Home Edition, and John Walsh, co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, addressed the topic of missing children, highlighting Morgan's abduction. Colin and Morgan's siblings received a new home after their family home was damaged by a water heater explosion. In November 2010, federal investigators searched a vacant house in Sparrow, Oklahoma, after receiving a tip from a confidential informant. Sparrow was about 25 miles from Alma, and the property they searched had once belonged to a convicted child molester who was currently in jail. Although investigators had nothing linking the man to Morgan's disappearance, they searched through the home looking for possible DNA evidence that might indicate Morgan had been there. Unfortunately, they didn't uncover anything related to the case. In August 2012, 2 convicts, identified as Tonya Smith and James Monhart, were accused of trying to buy some of Morgan's personal documents, including her social security number and birth certificate. While they were found guilty of document forgery, investigations determined they weren't involved in Morgan's disappearance. On December 18, 2017, police conducted another search on a property in Sparrow. Some reports said it was for an unrelated investigation, while others believed it was connected to Morgan's case. Notably, the search dogs signaled to a well on the property, which then became the focus of the search. After an intense 24-hour search, investigators left the property without finding any evidence. In November 2021, detectives identified Billy Jacklinks as a potential suspect in Morgan Mick's abduction. An Arkansas resident, Billy was a registered sex offender who had been in and out of prison since 1992. Reports suggest he had a typical upbringing, with no apparent signs of deviance. He served in the U.S. Army during World War and later worked for an airline in Dallas before returning to Arkansas. Despite seemingly staying out of trouble, he was arrested and charged with sexual offenses in 1992. 2 months after Morgan's 1995 disappearance, Billy attempted to kidnap an 11-year-old girl only 8 miles from where Morgan vanished. Witnesses reported he drove a red pickup truck, aligning with descriptions from Morgan's case. A week after Billy's arrest, investigators searched his truck, finding hair, fibers, a mash sheet, rope, a tarp, insulation tape, and blood on one of the seats. The samples were stored for future analysis, but it's unclear if they were tested then. Shortly after his arrest, Arkansas State Police and the FBI tried to question him about Morgan's case, but he invoked his right to an attorney and refused to talk. Regarding the 11-year-old he tried to kidnap, Billy proclaimed his innocence, but he was convicted of sexual solicitation and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 1995. Billy remained behind bars until his sudden illness and death on August 5, 2000. In 2021, a news channel aired a documentary titled Still Missing Morgan. Arkansas police mentioned they were still seeking information about the red truck with an attached white cabin. The documentary led to over 200 new tips, but none have resolved the case. The revelation about Billy Jacklinks was the last major update, but Morgan's disappearance remains an active investigation, with the police continuously receiving tips. Meanwhile, Colleen pleads with law enforcement to follow every lead, refusing to rest until his daughter is found, hoping for her safe return. This case has profoundly impacted Arkansas and even influenced the naming of the Amber Alert. The Amber Alert system began in 1996 after the disappearance of Amber Haderman in Arlington, Texas. Amber is an acronym for America's Missing, Broadcast Emergency Response, managed under the Department of Justice. The Morgan Nick Amber Alert is Arkansas's name for the program designed to alert the public when a child goes missing. This program is a joint effort between local law enforcement, media outlets, and civic groups to raise awareness about potential abductions, thereby increasing the chances of locating the missing child. Activating the Morgan Nick Alert involves the participation of all Arkansas law enforcement agencies, along with more than 250 local radio stations, TV networks, and other media outlets. This information is quickly disseminated to all parties, enabling them to broadcast details about a possible abduction widely. As of 2023, the case remains unsolved. Since Morgan's disappearance in 1995, her father, Morris, has opted for privacy, preferring not to discuss his daughter's case publicly. In contrast, Morgan's mother, Colleen, is vocal about her ongoing efforts to bring Morgan home. Colleen lives in Alma, Arkansas, where she runs the Morgan Mick Foundation, assisting families dealing with abductions or missing persons. Beyond advocating for these families, Colleen spreads awareness about daily dangers faced by children and offers detailed resources to help parents and teachers understand online safety basics and parental control apps. Despite extensive investigations that have yielded thousands of leads, there is still no concrete information on Morgan's whereabouts. The FBI and local communities have offered a reward of $60,000 for information leading to the recovery of Morgan Nick and the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible for her kidnapping. The Petit family was indeed seen as a model family, fulfilling the best expectations with their stable economic background and exemplary children. They were genuinely admired by those around them. The father, William Petit, was born and raised in Connecticut and stood out in almost every sport during high school, particularly in basketball, where he was a natural leader. In addition to his athletic prowess, he was also the most intelligent of his class, as evidenced by his completion of a law degree at Dartmouth University. However, his true calling was not law. He wanted to help people, care for the sick, and make the world a better place. So, after graduating, he decided to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his third year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse in the oncology area and co-director of the health center of a pre-graduate internship. They soon fell in love, and those who knew them affirmed they were perfect for each other. They got married in 1985. 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley, and the pregnancy spurred them to form a large family, leading them to buy a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After recovering from childbirth, Jennifer continued her work as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Unfortunately, she later developed multiple sclerosis, an incurable disease she battled for the rest of her life. However, her family never ceased to support her. At the age of 10, Their eldest daughter began fundraising for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, which would raise significant funds over the years. Michaela also excelled academically and planned to take over the fundraising efforts when her sister went to college to continue helping her community. She had spent the summer learning to cook and often enjoyed preparing meals for her family. Tragically, this routine activity would lead the family to a fateful encounter with the perpetrator. One July night in 2007, Michaela was preparing dinner for her family, but needed more ingredients for her recipe, so she and her mother went to the nearest market. At the same place was Joshua Komisarjevsky, who had recently been released from prison. Komisarjevsky's childhood was traumatic and complicated. Born to teenage parents, he was put up for adoption a week after birth by his mother and was adopted by the Komisarjevsky family, known for their reputation as distinguished artists in Europe. They were a religious family and very strict with him. Despite his high IQ, he struggled in school, leading his parents to homeschool him. During his trial, he claimed that he was sexually abused by a cousin in his childhood, but his family chose to keep it quiet. This led him to develop a rebellious and chaotic personality. By the age of 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky had been accused of abusing his sister, and it was around this time that he committed his first burglary, marking the start of his career as a thief. In 2002, he was arrested for the first time on 18 charges of burglary and theft, and was subsequently sentenced to 9 years in prison. During the trial, he made a chilling statement, saying, "I like to listen to people while they sleep. I like the feeling of invading their privacy and security." He was released on parole in 2007 at the age of 27. Officials in charge considered him a danger to society, being the calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. However, the jury did not heed the warnings and declared Joshua ostensibly fit for release. After his release, he stayed in a residence for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent a significant portion of his life in prison, first being incarcerated at the age of 16 in the year 1980. Over the years, he was frequently arrested for violent robbery and burglary. He was sentenced in 2004 and again granted parole in 2006, which led him to the same halfway house where he met Komisarjevsky. Returning to the night of July 22, 2007, Michaela Petit was preparing dinner for her family, but realized she needed more ingredients for her recipe. She asked her mother to take her to the nearest market to shop. Little did they know they were being observed by Komisarjevsky, who meticulously noted every detail, the make and model of their vehicle, their faces, and Michaela's blonde hair. After shopping, the Petit family returned home, unaware that they were being followed. Shortly afterwards, Hayes sent a text message to Komisarjevsky that read, "I'm chomping at the bit to get started. Need a margarita soon." Hayes then texted, "We still on?" Komisarjevsky replied, "Yes." Hayes' next text asked, "Soon?" To which Komisarjevsky replied, "I'm putting the kid to bed, hold your horses." Hayes replied, "Dude, the horses want to get loose." Komisarjevsky discreetly trailed the family in his car, learning the exact location of their home before withdrawing from the scene. The family enjoyed what seemed like a peaceful and normal dinner, unaware that it would be their last moment together. In the early hours, while everyone slept except for the father, William Petit, who had dozed off in the living room, their peace was shattered by strange noises inside the house. The next thing William remembered was a sense of grogginess, pain, and an inability to formulate a coherent thought. Komisarjevsky and Hayes had entered the house through an unlocked door and initially planned to rob the family. However, the night took a tragic turn. They found a baseball bat in the house and used it to repeatedly beat William, who remained conscious despite the assault. He heard one of the intruders say, "If he moves, shoot him." William was then tied up with zip ties and ropes, immobilized and bound to a pole in the basement. The intruders then went upstairs to find Haley's room, where she was sleeping. Haley and Michaela Petit were tied by their hands and feet to their bedposts, and their heads were covered with pillowcases. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer Petit had fallen asleep. The intruders quietly entered the room and woke her up. Without much effort, they tied Jennifer's hands and feet. Feeling in control of the house, the intruders took their time to inspect it, even smoking cigarettes in the living room. After collecting jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they decided to leave. It seemed the ordeal was over for the Petit family as they heard the burglars leaving. However, their torment was far from over. After selling the stolen items at a pawn shop and realizing they hadn't gotten as much money as expected, the ex-convicts, motivated by greed, decided to return to the house. They then found a check register with $40,000. They decided to steal $15,000. They also had stopped to fill a couple of gasoline cans before returning, as seen in surveillance camera footage. Back at the house, they told Jennifer their plan, threatening to kill her entire family if she didn't cooperate. Desperate but thinking of her daughter's safety, Jennifer agreed to accompany Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua took advantage of Jennifer's absence, entering Michaela's room, untying her, and beginning to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, he took her to the bathroom to clean her, ensuring no DNA evidence was left, then ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tie her up again. Evidence that Komisarjevsky raped Michaela came from her autopsy, during which state medical examiner Dr. Wayne Carver found his DNA in her body. At the bank, everything seemingly went well, but Stephen failed to notice what Jennifer did while in the queue. Before approaching the teller, she wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note read, "My name is Jennifer Hawk Petit. I need to withdraw $15,000 from my savings account. My family is in danger. Please call the police, or they will be killed." The teller decided to give her the money, even though Jennifer had no identification. With the cash in hand, Jennifer left the bank to return to the car with her captor, while the bank employee immediately called the police to report the incident. The manager told the dispatcher of the 911 line that Hawk Petit had indicated that the home invaders were being nice and that she believed they only wanted money. The Cheshire police responded to the bank's report by assessing the situation and setting up a vehicle perimeter, without revealing their presence. The police, now aware of the situation, observed from a distance without intervening. Back at the house, Joshua told his accomplice what he had done to Michaela, suggesting he could do the same to Jennifer. Without hesitation, Stephen subdued Jennifer, pressed her body to the ground, and began to undress her. William was able to hear his wife's assault upstairs. He yelled up and heard one of the invaders say, "Don't worry, it's all gonna be over in a couple of minutes." Meanwhile, William Petit, regaining consciousness and hearing his wife's screams, managed to free himself and crawl to the basement stairs, eventually making it to the backyard. He later said, "I thought, it's now or never, because in my mind at that moment, I thought they were going to shoot all of us." In a minute, Joshua went to check on William, only to find that he had escaped. Hayes said in her confession that while he was raping Hawk Petit on the living room floor, Komisarjevsky entered and announced that William had escaped. Hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death while continuing to assault her. Soon after, they heard William shouting for help. His neighbor, who initially didn't recognize him due to the injuries, called 911 immediately. Realizing the police would soon be called, the intruders decided to eliminate all evidence. Hayes and Komisarjevsky doused Jennifer's lifeless body and parts of the house, including the daughters' bedrooms and daughters themselves, with gasoline. Investigators would later find the accelerant on the Petit sisters' beds and on the clothing they were wearing. Hayes and Komisarjevsky started a fire and fled the scene. Unaware that the authorities had blocked the area a few miles ahead, they collided with a police vehicle within 5 minutes. After they were surrounded by the police, the two perpetrators were pulled from their vehicle and arrested. They were immediately identified as ex-convicts. Meanwhile, The fire in the house was rapidly growing. An ambulance arrived and transported the gravely injured father, Dr. William Petit, to the nearest hospital. Shortly afterward, firefighters attempted to combat the blaze and, upon extinguishing it, discovered a horrific scene in the remnants of the house. The first body found was that of Jennifer, completely charred with remnants of rope around her ankles. Upon reaching the second floor, they found Michaela tied to her bed, completely consumed by the fire. Haley, surprisingly, had managed to force her restraints and attempted to escape, but collapsed just a few meters away, having inhaled too much smoke. William had been able to free himself of his restraints, exit the house, and crawl to a neighbor's yard for help. The neighbor initially did not recognize him due to the severity of his injuries. Both Hayes and Komisarjevsky confessed to the murders. Detectives testified that Hayes smelled of gasoline throughout her interrogation. Each assailant claimed that the other was the driving force and mastermind behind the home invasion. Komisarjevsky also blamed William for the murders. In Komisarjevsky's diary, which was later entered into evidence, he called William a coward and claimed that he could have saved his family if he wanted to. Stephen Hayes' trial began on September 13, 2010, with a jury of 7 women and 5 men. The defense argued that Joshua Komisarjevsky was the mastermind behind the crime and responsible for escalating its violent nature, while prosecutors held that both Hayes and Komisarjevsky shared responsibility. On October 5, after about 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase began on October 18, with the jury initially split over recommending life imprisonment or death. Hayes' defense argued that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8, the jury recommended the death sentence for Hayes on each of the 6 capital felony counts. Hayes had previously attempted to negotiate a plea bargain for a life sentence, but prosecutors sought the death penalty. Dr. William Petit, the sole survivor, commented on the verdict, and the Connecticut State Judicial Branch offered post-traumatic stress assistance to jurors due to the disturbing nature of the trial. For the first time in state history, the Connecticut State Judicial Branch offered post-traumatic stress assistance to jurors who served for 2 months on the triple murder trial because they had been required to look at disturbing images and hear grisly testimony. On December 2, 2010, Hayes apologized for the pain and suffering he had caused the Petit family and added that death for me will be a welcome relief, and I hope it will bring some peace and comfort to those who I have hurt so much. Judge John Blue imposed 6 death sentences and an additional 106 years for other crimes. However, Hayes' death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in August 2015 when Connecticut abolished capital punishment. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began on September 19, 2011. His attorneys offered a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence, but prosecutors aimed for the death penalty, arguing that Komisarjevsky was a confused man led by Hayes. Komisarjevsky was found guilty on October 13, 2011, and the jury recommended the death penalty on December 9, 2011. During his sentencing, Komisarjevsky spoke about his shame and hurt caused by the crime, insisting that he did not intend to kill anyone. Judge Blue set July 20, 2012 as Komisarjevsky's execution date, echoing his responsibility for the crime. However, like Hayes, Komisarjevsky's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment in August 2015 after Connecticut abolished the death penalty. The trials and subsequent sentencing of Hayes and Komisarjevsky marked a significant and harrowing chapter in Connecticut's legal history. The brutal nature of the crimes and the trial's emotional toll on all involved, including the jurors, highlighted the complexities and challenges of the legal system in dealing with such heinous acts. Dr. Petit's statements during the trials underscored the lasting impact of the crime on surviving family members and the community, which continues to honor the memory of the victims. The only survivor, Dr. William Petit, was discharged from the hospital 4 days after his admission to attend the funeral of his family. Haunted by guilt and the torment of having survived, He later established a foundation to help children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. Subsequently, as a member of the Republican Party, he ventured into politics and became a state representative. The murders of the Petit family left a deep impact on the community, which gathers annually to pay tribute to them. Questions remain among family members and the public about whether the authorities acted correctly in their response to the situation. The time spent by the authorities observing the situation from a distance could have been crucial in preventing the tragedy. Francisco Benitez, known as Paco, entered the world on December 13, 1963, in Algeciras, a city in Spain. Growing up alongside his two brothers and one sister, he spent his childhood in a town bordering Morocco. Paco received his education at a Catholic boarding school. When he turned 20, he made a significant move to Seville, where his parents, including his mother, whose occupation remains unknown, and his father, a retired nursing assistant, had settled. In 1986, Paco embarked on a new journey by enlisting in the French Foreign Legion, a branch of the French military with a storied history dating back to 1831. During his service, Paco was assigned to various missions, including deployments to the Persian Gulf and Gabon, where he demonstrated his dedication and valor. In recognition of his service, he was honored with the Cross of War and the Military Medal. In 1988, while stationed at Marseille, Paco's path crossed with Marie-José, or Maria-José, as he called her, a French woman working in bars near the port he frequented. Maria-José was a single mother raising 4 children, each from a different father. Paco and Maria-José began dating and soon decided to move in together. Over time, their family expanded, and on May 24, 1994, Maria-José and Paco welcomed their first child together, Allison, who became Paco's cherished firstborn daughter. Paco was known for his deep love and protective nature as a father, although he also had a history of infidelity. Around 1998, Paco embarked on a tumultuous relationship with Simone de Oliveira Alves, a young woman of Brazilian origin with 4 children. He met Simone in a club, and for some years he led a double life with her until their relationship ultimately came to an end in late 2004. Despite Maria-José's discovery of Paco's infidelity, she chose to forgive him. More than a decade after Allison's birth, Maria-José and Paco decided to formalize their relationship through marriage. Their wedding took place on November 10, 2006. This event marked the occasion when Maria-José adopted her husband's last name, and they both endeavored to build a harmonious and contented life together. In 2010, Paco experienced another relocation, this time to the recruitment area of the French Foreign Legion in Perpignan, a city situated in southern France. As of December 2012, troubles began to emerge within the couple's relationship, culminating in their separation. Maria-José initiated divorce proceedings, driven by a discovery made by their daughter during the Christmas of 2012. It was during this time that Allison stumbled upon messages of affection exchanged between her father and a new romantic interest named Dolores, a fellow soldier stationed in Perpignan. Learning of Paco's continued infidelity, Maria-José confronted him, no longer willing to tolerate his unfaithfulness, which ultimately led to his departure from their home. Despite the challenges in his marriage, Paco continued to engage in romantic pursuits. He parted ways with Dolores when she sought a more committed relationship, and he subsequently commenced a new affair with a familiar face, compatriot Maria Teresa, who worked as a guard at the French consulate in Barcelona. Meanwhile, as her mother navigated the complexities of divorce proceedings, Allison sought to lead a typical life for a young person her age. At 19, she secured employment at a hair salon and nurtured her interests in modeling and beauty pageants, passions that had taken root in her early years. Allison's educational achievements, kindness, and natural beauty had earned her a coveted spot in a beauty competition scheduled for August 11, 2013. Winning this competition would have opened doors for her, guaranteeing participation in Miss France 2014 and bringing her one step closer to realizing her dream of being crowned the most beautiful woman in her country. However, on July 14, 2013, while the French were celebrating their national holiday, a preparatory meeting for the contestants took place. Surprisingly, Allison did not attend this crucial meeting, causing surprise among her fellow contestants and organizers. From that day onwards, neither she nor her mother were heard from again. According to Paco's account, on Sunday the 14th, he had driven his daughter to the pre-contest meeting. Subsequently, he returned to their family home, where he found himself embroiled in an argument with Maria Jose over an electricity bill. Paco stated that he later went back to pick up Allison, and they both returned to their city of residence. Upon their arrival, he discovered that Maria Jose had packed her bags, seemingly preparing to leave the house with her younger daughter, heading towards Toulouse. This was the story Paco shared with anyone seeking news of Allison and Maria Jose. A text message sent from Maria Jose's phone at 5:17 p.m. on that Sunday seemed to corroborate this account. In the message, she informed her eldest daughter, Lydia, that they were going to Toulouse. She found this decision reasonable, given that her sister aspired to work for a renowned cosmetics manufacturer, and Maria Jose was also in search of employment in that town. Unfortunately, this was the last communication received from them. Allison was known for her active presence on social media, but on July 14, shortly before 5 p.m., her Facebook account went silent. Concern began to grow among those closest to her, especially considering her consistent online activity. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to contact them, a family friend eventually reported their disappearance to the police. Initially, authorities argued that since both Maria Jose and Allison were adults, they had the freedom to travel without notifying anyone. However, the pressure from concerned family members eventually led Paco to make the difficult decision to report the disappearance of Maria Jose, aged 53, and Allison, aged 19, on July 25. This action marked the initiation of a police investigation into their mysterious disappearance. Investigations unveiled unsettling details. Both of their phones had been switched off since July 14, and no credit card transactions were recorded. Furthermore, there was no trace of the mother and daughter at Toulouse or the Perpignan train station, both logical departure points given that they did not possess a car or driver's licenses for independent travel. Interviews with friends and family firmly ruled out the possibility of them running away, particularly in Allison's case, as she was deeply enthusiastic about her life in Perpignan and her dream of becoming a beauty queen. A delegate from the Miss France committee shared in an interview that participating in the competition had been Allison's dream, and she had been highly motivated. She also recounted how Allison would frequently call for advice on what to wear in the days leading up to events. Additionally, she emphasized Allison's punctuality and her habit of notifying them if she was running late, making her sudden absence without explanation all the more perplexing. The investigation naturally focused on Paco, as he was the last person known to have seen them alive. Compounding his situation, the ongoing issues with his ex-partner and revelations of his double life made him the prime suspect. Media coverage of the case intensified, and the French public became engrossed in the unfolding mystery. Journalists crowded the street where the family's house was located, and passers-by didn't hesitate to direct accusations at Paco. On August 5, 3 weeks after the disappearance of his ex-wife and daughter, 50-year-old Paco was tragically discovered deceased. He had taken his own life by hanging himself in the barracks of the Foreign Legion, where he worked as a recruitment officer. Forensic experts determined that his death occurred between 5 and 7 in the morning of that fateful day. Following Paco's tragic death, a series of emails and letters addressed to coworkers and family members came to light, along with a final video that was published on the website of a French magazine. In these messages, Paco expressed his enduring love for his wife and daughter, emphasizing that the burden of suspicion had pushed him to take his own life. One of Paco's last lovers recounted that he had vehemently maintained his innocence and couldn't bear the weight of being viewed as the prime suspect in a crime against his daughter and former wife. French media initially reported that Paco's suicide was driven by overwhelming guilt. However, Maria Jose's brother conveyed a different perspective when he spoke to journalists. He did not believe that his brother-in-law had harmed his family or played a role in their disappearance. He described the last time he had seen Paco on Sunday of August 4 as a moment when Paco appeared utterly broken. Paco had described himself as a man of honor, but with nothing left to lose. During that interaction, he also shared his suspicion that his sister had left their home in a fit of anger and might be in a place where she couldn't easily return due to the scandal surrounding her disappearance. These statements introduced doubt about Paco's guilt and even stirred feelings of sympathy and compassion for the deceased Legionnaire. However, the same video and news of Paco's death brought forth a revelation that altered the course of the narrative. This revelation harkened back to 2004 and pertained to Simone, the woman with whom Paco had a double life. It emerged that upon learning of Paco's death through the news, Simone's relatives recognized him and promptly contacted the authorities. They revealed that Paco had been Simone's lover for 6 years until her inexplicable disappearance. In connection to this, one of Simone's sisters disclosed that shortly before vanishing, Simone had been hospitalized due to either a spontaneous abortion or an attempted suicide following a violent altercation with Paco. This fight reportedly occurred because Simone had discovered that Paco had not yet separated from his wife, Maria Jose. Tragically, Simone never reappeared, and Paco moved on with his life. As investigators compared both cases, they noted some striking similarities. Firstly, in both cases, the last sign of life from the women involved was a text message sent from their phones. Simone informing Paco that she was leaving, and Maria Jose sending a message to one of her daughters. These parallels raised questions and added a layer of complexity to the mystery surrounding the disappearances. Another notable similarity in both cases relates to the delay in reporting the disappearances by Paco. In November 2004, he waited for several days before reporting Simone's disappearance to the police, a pattern that raised suspicion, even though he could no longer be prosecuted for the crimes committed. In late September 2013, a report raised disturbing questions. It was revealed that in mid-July, Paco had purchased a significant quantity of lye, a chemical known for its ability to degrade DNA, making it challenging for forensic experts to detect traces of cleaned blood at a crime scene. During meticulous forensic examinations, officials from the crime lab discovered compelling evidence of a substantial blood spill that had been meticulously cleaned both in the residence where Maria Jose and Allison lived and in the barracks where Paco worked. Specifically, blood was confirmed to be present in the drainage of a freezer. A fellow soldier recounted that on July 17, he had assisted Paco in transporting this freezer from his home to the Legion's headquarters. The same witness informed the police that he had seen traces of blood in a clogged sink within Paco's apartment. Moreover, officials found indications of blood in the room that Paco occupied within the barracks and within a washing machine where he had been observed washing sheets and clothing. Other unsettling details centered around the alleged disappearance of approximately 30 bed sheets from the military installation in July. Additionally, there were reports of a soldier who had witnessed Paco using a hose to clean a carpet from which a reddish liquid was emerging, a situation the man had explained as a result of staining while defrosting meat. Despite the high hopes generated by these revelations, the police faced difficulties in conclusively establishing the connection between Allison's DNA and the traces of washed blood or determining whether it resulted from the young girl's contact with the analyzed items. but her mother's blood DNA was found in the family washing machine. The neighbors also recalled Paco switching his vehicle from a white car to a dark van around the time of their disappearance. The van was subsequently seized by the police for further examination, although initial tests did not yield any immediate results. Nevertheless, the introduction of this new evidence into the case file only served to intensify suspicions of criminal involvement by Paco. As discussions surrounding Paco's possible connection to the disappearances gained momentum, reactions from those who knew the family were swift. Allison's former boss expressed how the entire community was deeply shaken by the unfolding story. Allison had been a beloved and dedicated employee at the hair salon, and her absence had a profound impact on the clientele. To them, it was inconceivable that her father could be linked to her disappearance. An unnamed family member told French media that Allison had been actively trying to understand the true nature of Paco. She questioned why her affectionate father was frequently absent, including during holidays like Christmas. She even harbored suspicions that her father might have had a double life with another family elsewhere and was possibly tracking one of his lovers on the internet. These revelations added layers of complexity and intrigue to the already perplexing case. Maria Jose's brother, whom we've mentioned previously, shared the ongoing anguish that his family endured 5 months after that fateful July 14. He revealed that their desperation had not subsided since the beginning of the ordeal. He described how his life had come to a standstill, often disrupted by sleepless nights where he would turn to his computer in search of answers. He also expressed deep concern for his nephews, Maria Jose's other children, who had essentially been raised by Paco and affectionately referred to him as Dad. In contrast to his initial impressions after the disappearances, he stated that all the elements of the investigation seemed to point towards Paco as the primary suspect in the eyes of his family. However, he acknowledged that the evidence incriminating Paco was not sufficient to definitively prove that he had murdered Maria Jose and Allison. On the other hand, he remained open to the possibility that Paco might have had an accomplice. This theory arose from the last message allegedly sent by Maria Jose, which was written in impeccable French. He believed it couldn't have been Paco's work, as he struggled with the French language and had poor writing skills. He emphasized that at times when he communicated with Paco, he even had to ask him to rewrite sentences because they were incomprehensible. He vividly remembered Paco as a fiercely protective father who had never exhibited any signs of violence, making it inconceivable to him that Paco could harm his own daughter. He recounted that on the night before Paco took his own life, they spent 2 hours with him, and he appeared utterly devastated, continuously mentioning that he was going to do something reckless. Later that evening, Paco went to have dinner with one of his military colleagues, and when he called him again an hour later, Paco seemed calm. What struck him as very strange was the fact that he had to learn about the disappearances through television on August 1. In the midst of the turmoil, he reached out to Paco, who explained the disappearance and the supposed journey undertaken by Maria Jose and Allison. Paco reminded him that Maria Jose had left their home for 4 days on a prior occasion. Additionally, Paco apologized for not being in touch and claimed to have lost his contacts. 1 year after Allison and her mother's inexplicable disappearance, the judge in charge met with Maria Jose's brother, who had become the main civil party involved in the perplexing case. In that conversation, Maria Jose's brother was informed that investigations were still ongoing, reigniting a glimmer of hope that someday they might uncover the truth. Following this meeting, Maria Jose's brother candidly admitted that he woke up every morning with the hope of receiving a call informing him that they had been found. Although he had become more cautious and less optimistic over time, he underscored the importance of discovering the whole truth. He had become convinced of Paco's involvement in his family member's disappearance when Marie's DNA was found in the washing machine. He acknowledged that his life had essentially come to a halt since his sister and niece vanished. He dedicated all his time to collecting, comparing, and assembling evidence, driven by an unwavering determination to uncover the truth. Almost 3 years after the mysterious disappearances, it appeared that definitive evidence was within reach, though investigators exercised caution in their pursuit of the truth. During that time, bone fragments were discovered on a secluded beach. The seemingly human bones were stumbled upon by none other than Maria José's own brother, who found them inside a plastic bag. He swiftly arrived at the scene after receiving a tip from a witness and immediately alerted the authorities. 5 investigators from the judicial police were tasked with conducting excavations, with the presence of a forensic doctor who played a crucial role in extracting the bones. The discovery prompted the investigation to determine the causes of death. The police announced that DNA analysis would be conducted in the following days, but the expected resolution did not materialize. The family's lawyer held a strong belief that these remains belonged to the 2 missing women. His conviction was grounded in the fact that shortly after their disappearance, it was determined through the location data of his cell phone that Paco had been in close proximity to the location where the bones were discovered. Indeed, in the months that followed July 2013, exhaustive searches had been carried out in that expansive sandy area, all to no avail. The most recent information regarding this enigmatic case dates back to the year 2021, indicating that the bodies of Maria and Allison had still not been located. The family's lawyer, in his assessment, contended that the case had been mishandled from the very beginning. He explained that the initial hours and days are crucial in solving a crime, and therefore the delayed report significantly impeded the investigation. In his view, the prospects of unraveling the mystery surrounding the disappearance of Maria José and Allison might have extinguished on the same day. Paco took his own life, carrying all his secrets to the grave. Cindy James was born on June 12, 1944, the daughter of Otto and Matilda. Her original name was Cynthia Elizabeth Hack, but she later changed it to Cindy James for reasons that will become apparent. Her father, a retired colonel from the Canadian Air Force, and her mother, housewife, raised Cindy and her 5 siblings in a home known for its kindness, generosity, and friendliness. Cindy, characterized by her special nature and desire to help others, pursued a career in nursing. During this period, her father had re-enlisted with the Air Force and relocated the family to France, where she visited them during holidays. During this time, in letters to her family, Cindy occasionally referred to an unnamed intern she had met during her studies. She claimed that the 2 had at one point been engaged, and that, after finding he had terminal cancer, the man committed suicide while the couple were on a skiing trip. None of her parents or siblings, however, ever met the man, and Cindy did not name him. In the summer of 1965, Cindy met Roy Makepeace, a South African psychiatrist 18 years her senior. The 2 married on December 9, 1966, the same year she graduated from nursing school. Despite the age difference, their marriage initially seemed harmonious, and they began their life together with Cindy working as a nurse. In 1975, Cindy's career took a significant turn when she became the coordinator of a day center for minors with behavioral issues. Her dedication and passion for her work were evident during her 12-year tenure at the center. Cindy's commitment to the children was deeply appreciated by their parents, who recognized her profound impact and devotion. A pivotal moment in Cindy's life occurred after these 12 years when she decided to seek change. She left her job at the day center and accepted a nursing position at Richmond Hospital. Around the same time, Cindy and Roy's marriage ended in divorce. This marked a complete transformation in Cindy's life. She moved out of the house she shared with Roy, found a new place to live, adopted a pet, and immersed herself in work to stay occupied. This busy new lifestyle, was Cindy's way of coping with the changes and challenges following her divorce. It's not clear why she divorced Roy. What has been found is that at least on 2 or 3 occasions, Roy had hit Cindy, so perhaps the reason she divorced was that he mistreated her. Despite this, it is known that Cindy and her ex-husband, Roy, claimed to have divorced on amicable terms, even though he had physically assaulted her several times. They maintained that they still had a good relationship and got along well. However, 4 months after her divorce and the beginning of her new life, Cindy's nightmare commenced. In October 1982, Cindy began receiving numerous unsettling phone calls at her home. Often, these calls were met with silence, as if no one was on the other end, or she would hear faint sounds like breathing or mumbling, but could not discern any clear message. This pattern persisted, suggesting that it was not an error but an intentional act to intimidate her. The calls were made from an untraceable number, leaving Cindy in the dark about the identity of the caller. On one occasion, while at home with friends, Cindy answered the phone only to hear the familiar, indiscernible noises. After hanging up, she noticed that the living room curtains, which she had previously closed, were now open. Startled, she closed the curtains and blinds, but the phone rang again. This time, the caller ominously remarked, "It's silly for you to hide. I know you're in the living room." This incident epitomized the terrifying reality Cindy faced daily, feeling watched yet unable to see her observer. The harassment escalated as Cindy began receiving bizarre letters in her mail. These letters, composed of newspaper clippings arranged to form threatening messages, conveyed ominous sentiments like "soon, Cindy, soon, and you're dead." Additionally, some letters contained violent imagery, depicting assaulted women or a person brandishing a knife near a woman's image. Despite the palpable threat these letters posed, Cindy had no clue about their origin and had never encountered the sender. Fearing for her safety and unsure of what to do, Cindy sought advice from her parents and ex-husband Roy. Both her parents and Roy urged her to contact the police and file a formal complaint, which Cindy did on October 12, 1982. The police, in their investigation, interviewed Cindy's friends and family to ascertain if anyone bore a grudge against her or knew of someone who might wish her harm. However, their efforts yielded no leads. Cindy, known for her compassionate and helpful nature as a nurse devoted to aiding people and children, was widely regarded as a genuinely kind and generous individual. This raised the question, who would want to harm someone like Cindy? The police were unable to identify anyone who wished to harm Cindy James, contrary to expectations that the situation would resolve after her complaint. The harassment persisted. Just 3 days later, while Cindy was in her kitchen, a brick shattered her window. Understandably alarmed, Cindy immediately contacted the police. On their arrival, officers conducted a thorough search of the house, yard, the alley behind the house, and the paths between the neighboring houses. Despite their efforts, they found no evidence of suspicious activity or clues to the perpetrator's identity. No witnesses had seen anyone, leaving the police with no leads. It seemed as though Cindy was being attacked by an unseen force. A week later, as Cindy prepared for bed, she encountered another disturbing scene. In her bedroom, she found her pillow slashed as if someone had attacked it with a knife. Cindy again called the police, who this time dispatched a different officer, Patrick McBride, to investigate. He thoroughly examined the surroundings and spoke with Cindy. After their discussion, he expressed his belief that Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, was responsible for the attacks. Cindy was skeptical, finding it hard to believe, especially since Roy had advised her to contact the police. Nevertheless, Pat was convinced that Roy was the culprit. To enhance Cindy's safety, Pat installed locks on all the doors and set up detectors in her house. He committed to checking on her daily and did so for nearly a month. During this time, Pat and Cindy grew close, eventually starting a romantic relationship. While Pat lived with Cindy, the harassment ceased. However, Pat remained vigilant, continuing to monitor the house's surroundings. One day, he encountered Roy near the back of the house and confronted him. Roy explained that he was concerned for Cindy's safety and was checking to ensure she was not in danger from her stalker. Pat, however, doubted Roy's explanation and maintained his suspicion that Roy was the one harassing Cindy. After a month, Cindy decided to end her cohabitation with Pat, though their relationship did not immediately dissolve. Once Pat left, the tranquility that had settled during his stay vanished, and the unsettling phone calls, letters, and noises resumed, marking the return of Cindy's nightmare. On one occasion, Cindy arrived home to a horrifying scene: 3 dead cats inside her house, accompanied by a chilling note stating, "You're next." In an effort to enhance her security, Cindy installed lights on her porch to potentially spot any intruders. However, she frequently found her porch lights and phone line broken. Despite repeatedly reporting these incidents to the police, their investigations yielded no evidence. There was no sign that anyone besides Cindy had been in or around the house. Not even footprints were found. As a result, the police decided to tap her phone in hopes of tracking the calls, but the brief duration of the calls hindered their ability to trace the caller's location. After some time, Cindy experienced her first physical attack. She had invited her close friend Agnes for a girls' night at her home. When Agnes arrived and noticed the house was dark, she suspected something was amiss. After attempting to reach Cindy without success, Agnes entered the house and found Cindy lying on the floor, unconscious, with her hands tied behind her back and a pair of nylon stockings wrapped tightly around her neck. Agnes quickly removed the stockings, allowing Cindy to regain consciousness. Upon waking, Cindy could not recall the full extent of the attack. She remembered needing something from her garage, which required her to go outside, as there was no direct access from inside the house. It was during this moment that she was attacked from behind and strangled with the stockings. The only detail Cindy could remember about her attacker was that they wore white sneakers, a common and non-distinctive feature. Realizing her life could not continue in this manner, Cindy decided to make a radical change. She altered her appearance, dyed her hair, and chose to move out of her current residence, changing her last name from Hack to James. This decision led her to return to the house she had previously shared with her ex-husband, who offered her the place to live while he moved elsewhere. Although Roy's gesture appeared helpful, the circumstances surrounding it raised suspicions. After relocating to her former home, she continued to discover unsettling items on her porch, such as piles of raw meat accompanied by threatening notes declaring, "You're mixed," and "You are dead meat." These notes, crafted from newspaper clippings, reappeared relentlessly, along with the resumption of mysterious phone calls, now directed to her new number at Roy's house. Cindy persistently contacted the police regarding these incidents, and they responded each time. However, the officers were unable to find any physical evidence or signs of anyone else's presence besides Cindy's. This lack of evidence led the police to grow skeptical about her claims, suspecting that she might be fabricating the events. A grave concern since police protection depends on the credibility of the victim. Cindy had been enduring this harassment for almost 7 years, facing different forms of torment daily. Throughout these 7 years, the police, repeatedly visiting her property and finding no leads, started to feel worn out by the case. Realizing the diminishing attention and belief from the police, Cindy decided to hire a private detective. The detective installed special motion-activated lights on her porch, designed to illuminate the area whenever someone approached. These lights were strategically placed to avoid tampering, as previous outdoor lights had been repeatedly broken. He also provided Cindy with a walkie-talkie equipped with a panic button, enabling her to alert him, the authorities, and paramedics in case of an emergency. This device also allowed him to listen in on Cindy's surroundings, offering a way to monitor her safety. 2 days after receiving the walkie-talkie, Cindy informed the detective of her intention to walk her dog, leaving the device at home. Upon her return, the detective heard through the walkie-talkie that she had entered the house. However, shortly afterward, he detected unusual noises, suggesting someone else was present with Cindy. Faced with the dilemma of potentially alerting the intruder by speaking, he chose to drive to Cindy's house in an attempt to catch the individual in the act. On his arrival at Cindy James' house, he found a dire situation. Opening the door, he discovered Cindy lying unconscious on the floor with a dagger embedded in her hand. Between her hand and the dagger was a note, and around her neck were black nylon stockings as if someone had attempted to strangle her. He immediately assisted Cindy, called for paramedics, and she was swiftly taken to the hospital. Still alive, the note reading "You're dead meat" was particularly noteworthy as it was handwritten, suggesting the possibility of obtaining fingerprints or analyzing the handwriting for clues. At the hospital, doctors noticed a sore-inch mark on Cindy's arm, indicating she had been injected with a sedative. When Cindy regained consciousness, she was questioned about any recollections of her attacker or the incident. Unfortunately, her memory was blank. She could only recall entering her house after walking her dog and being attacked from behind. Following the injection, her memory ceased and she lost consciousness. Frustratingly, the police did not pursue any potential leads from the incident. They neglected to analyze the note for DNA or fingerprints, nor did they examine the dagger for any forensic evidence. Despite the presence of potential clues, the police remained convinced that Cindy was self-inflicting these wounds and orchestrating the entire scenario for attention. The private detective disagreed with the police's assessment and believed Cindy was not responsible for her own plight. Considering Cindy's history of being harassed for 7 years, he found it implausible that she would inflict such harm on herself, particularly in such a violent manner as her last attack. Resolute in finding the truth, he decided to explore the possibility of hypnosis, a common investigative technique in the 70s and 80s, to uncover any repressed memories Cindy might have of her assailant. However, the hypnosis session was unsuccessful, leaving Cindy's memory of the attack as elusive as ever. The possibility that Cindy's ex-partner, a psychiatrist, might have played a role in her amnesia was considered. Given his professional background, he could have had the knowledge and means to manipulate Cindy's memory using drugs or hypnotherapy. This theory, while speculative, raised questions about the extent of his involvement in her ordeal and the possibility of his using his expertise to conceal his actions. Despite the hypnosis session failing to unlock any memories for Cindy James, the police proceeded to administer a polygraph test. At the time, the polygraph was a widely used investigative tool, despite its reliability being questionable today. It is understood that a person who firmly believes in their version of events can pass a polygraph test. Cindy underwent the test and passed, indicating she was not lying according to the polygraph results. However, the police interpreted this outcome as Cindy being too traumatized to provide reliable results. This interpretation was in stark contrast to their earlier stance, where they believed Cindy was fabricating the events for attention, highlighting a contradiction in their approach and a reluctance to further investigate the case. Despite the police's skepticism, they decided to re-interview Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, and a prime suspect due to his background as a psychiatrist and access to medications and knowledge that could be used to harm Cindy. However, Roy denied any involvement, He too passed a polygraph test, which further complicated the investigation. The police's interest in the case persisted, driven by the curiosity surrounding the unexplained events occurring around Cindy. To monitor the situation, the police discreetly stationed a patrol car near Cindy's house for a week. During this period, no unusual incidents were reported. It was on December 11, 1985, that Cindy was found in a critical state. She was unconscious, with a black nylon stocking tied around her neck and a puncture mark on her arm from an injection. Cindy was physically battered and bore cuts on her body, but was alive. Taken to the hospital, she again had no memory of the attack upon regaining consciousness. After being discharged, Cindy, understandably frightened, invited her friend Agnes and Agnes' husband to stay at her house. That night, they reported hearing strange noises in the basement. Upon investigation, they discovered a fire in the basement. Agnes' husband noticed a person outside the house, not on the property but nearby, and looking towards the house. The identity of this person remained unknown due to the darkness and the distance. When they attempted to call for help, they discovered the phone line was cut, prompting Agnes' husband to seek assistance from neighbors. The firefighters were called and successfully extinguished the fire. After the fire incident in Cindy James' basement, the police conducted a thorough examination of her house, but found no evidence, such as footprints or any other signs of an intruder. Consequently, they concluded that Cindy was the one who started the fire. Due to their belief that Cindy was self-inflicting harm and the potential danger it posed, the police recommended she be admitted to a psychiatric institution. Feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about her situation, Cindy agreed to the hospitalization and spent the next 10 weeks in a psychiatric facility. On her release from the hospital, Cindy realized the importance of sharing her experiences and suspicions to shed light on the ongoing nightmare. She gathered her friends, family, and the police to disclose information she had previously withheld. Cindy revealed that during one of the attacks, the assailant had threatened to harm her family if she ever disclosed her beliefs about the identity of her attacker. She expressed a firm conviction that her ex-husband was the stalker. The police, prompted by Cindy's revelation, interrogated Roy once more. Despite Cindy's accusations, Roy maintained his innocence, asserting that he had always supported her, even advising her to contact the police and offering her a place to stay. To bolster his claim, Roy presented a recording he claimed to have captured on the answering machine at the house where Cindy was living, which was previously their shared home. The recording featured a female voice, suggesting that a woman, not Roy, was harassing Cindy. The police's response to Roy's evidence and Cindy's accusations was disheartening. They seemed more inclined to believe that Cindy was fabricating the entire situation rather than pursuing leads that could reveal the true perpetrator. This approach led to a troubling scenario where the police favored Roy's narrative over Cindy's and hastily dismissed her claims. Roy further complicated matters by suggesting to the police that Cindy suffered from multiple personality disorder. This claim appeared baseless, as no such diagnosis was made during Cindy's extended stay in the psychiatric hospital. Roy's insistence on this theory, coupled with his actions and concerns for Cindy that seemed inconsistent with his claims, cast doubt on his credibility. The overall situation presented a perplexing and unresolved puzzle, with the police fixated on discrediting Cindy rather than thoroughly investigating the case. On May 25, 1989, Cindy James started her day early, around 7 a.m., by going to the bank to deposit a check. She also visited a store to purchase groceries and had plans to meet with her best friend Agnes and Agnes' husband. Despite the police's suspicion that Cindy was fabricating the events surrounding her, their investigation continued. It's notable that over the 7 years of Cindy's case, the police spent an estimated $1.5 million, indicating the significant resources dedicated to the investigation. However, there was a sense of wariness from the police, as if they were conducting the investigation out of obligation rather than genuine concern. On the day in question, when Agnes and her husband arrived at Cindy's house, they found it odd that she wasn't there. While an empty house might not usually cause concern, Cindy's situation was different due to the ongoing harassment she faced. Agnes decided to alert the police while they searched for Cindy at places she might have visited, like the bank and the store. Their search led them to Cindy's car in the bank's parking lot. The presence of the car in the afternoon, after the bank's closing hours, raised alarm, especially considering her plans with her friends. Approaching the car, they found Cindy was not inside, deepening their concern. They went to the police station to report the situation. Despite initially being told they must wait 24 hours to file a missing person report, they convinced an officer to investigate due to the unique circumstances of Cindy's case. The officer, inspecting the car at night, discovered bloodstains on the driver's seat and found Cindy's purse, bank card, and a deposit receipt inside the car. The receipt showed Cindy had been at the bank early that morning. In the trunk were her grocery bags and a gift she had purchased for her friends at approximately 2:25 p.m. With this information, the police proceeded to Roy's apartment to question him. Arriving close to dawn, they found Roy at home. He explained that he had spent the afternoon and evening with a friend, having dinner and then staying at the friend's house until about 11:30 p.m. Roy's alibi appeared solid and could be corroborated, leading the police to continue their search for Cindy elsewhere. The disappearance of Cindy James mobilized the entire city of Richmond in a massive search operation. Helicopters, dogs, vehicles, and numerous people were deployed in an extensive effort to locate her. The search extended to various terrains, including underwater areas and the port, encompassing the wide radius around the location where her car was found. Despite the exhaustive efforts and resources utilized, Cindy remained missing. On June 8th of the same year, more than 2 weeks after her disappearance, Cindy was found in the yard of an abandoned house, approximately an hour and a half's distance from where her car had been located. The discovery was made in a region relatively close to the initial search area, which was surprising given the scale and intensity of the search efforts. The abandoned house, situated in an area frequented by many people, led investigators to theorize that Cindy could not have been left there for the entire duration of her disappearance. The likelihood of her being seen by passersby in such a busy area suggested that she may have been held captive elsewhere before being left at the location. Cindy's body exhibited signs of severe physical abuse, including bruises, cuts, and a syringe injection mark on her arm. She was found with her hands and feet bound, and a black nylon stocking was tied around her neck, consistent with previous incidents. The autopsy revealed that Cindy had been injected with a substantial amount of morphine and another sedative medication, leading to the conclusion that she had been drugged and then strangled. The police's conclusion about the case was controversial and unexpected. They posited that Cindy had committed suicide by injecting herself with a lethal dose of morphine and another sedative, then walking a significant distance barefoot to the location where she was found. Remarkably, her feet were clean and her shoes were not found nearby. The police theorized that Cindy managed to tie her own hands and feet and strangle herself with the nylon stocking. This conclusion was met with skepticism and disbelief due to the implausibility of the scenario and the lack of concrete evidence to support such a theory. Several alternative theories have been proposed to explain Cindy's tragic fate. One theory suggests that her ex-husband was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory posits that Roy's apparent compassion and offers of help were tactics to divert suspicion from himself. Another theory implicates Pat, the police officer who developed a close relationship with Cindy. It suggests that Pat may have been her stalker, using his position to gain her trust, and then resuming the harassment after their relationship ended. However, this theory is complicated by the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. A less credible theory is that Cindy was responsible for the attacks herself, due to a mental disorder. This theory is largely dismissed due to the nature of her injuries and the circumstances of her death, which seem beyond the realm of self-infliction. Lastly, there is the possibility that an unknown stalker, unrelated to Cindy's close acquaintances, was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory considers the potential involvement of an outsider who targeted not only Cindy but potentially others as well. Each theory presents its own set of questions and uncertainties, leaving the true nature of Cindy Jane's tragic experiences unresolved. Iban Federico Diaz was a 27-year-old man who lived in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina, with his mother and his stepfather. He was characterized as a very calm young man, completely devoted to his loved ones, and he loved spending time with his godchildren, as his older siblings had given him the pleasure of being a godfather. Since his adolescence, Iban knew that he needed to find a job to help support his family, and that's how he found a job at a nearby supermarket. Every day without fail, he would get up and go to work, never asking for a day off unless it was absolutely necessary. However, nobody appreciated his good performance. Iban was very open about his attraction to people of the same gender. He never had a problem admitting that he liked men. This made him the subject of ridicule from his colleagues and even his supervisors. Iban endured this for a long time, as he wanted to save up to buy a piece of land and build a house there, but the annoyance caused by the harassment from his colleagues led him to seriously consider looking for another job. And he almost did, until a kind of light appeared at the end of the tunnel. During the year 2016, within the same supermarket, he met Fernando Ambrosio, a 30-year-old man who instantly captivated him. They started their relationship as friends and over the weeks began to see each other more and more often since both lived in the same city. The relationship eventually became romantic, but it wasn't perfect. It had to be kept a secret as Fernando was married to a woman and had 2 young children. He had no interest in the rest of the world, knowing his true orientation. Shortly after, Fernando's wife became pregnant. He told Iban that the best thing was to end their relationship. This upset Iban quite a bit, however. Passion was stronger, and a few months later, they started seeing each other again. Through 2 years of encounters as passionate as they were clandestine, in 2019, Fernando decided to end the relationship forever, feeling that they were being too obvious and not wanting to raise suspicions in his family. From then on, Iban would never be the same. For many months, he wondered, why had he made such a sudden decision? The pain turned into anger, and one day, Iban decided to threaten Fernando, telling him that if he didn't come back to him, he would tell everything about their romance to his wife. Fernando did not take this well. By that time, Iban was transferred to another branch of the supermarket, and they never saw each other again. On September 19, Iban, who was then 30 years old, left his house to enjoy his day off, and while he was heading to take public transport, he ran into his brother, who greeted him cheerfully, not knowing that there was something different in Iban. For the first time in many months, he was happy. What he was completely unaware of was that this would be the last time he would see him. That night, the man did not return home. His mother tried to call him several times, but he never answered. After leaving 100 messages, they decided to search for him in the neighborhood. However, there were no traces of him. Nobody had seen him since the afternoon. They went to the police station to file a missing person report, but the police told them that to formalize it, they had to wait at least 48 hours. It wasn't necessary, as by the next day, there were already news about Ivan, but they were not good at all. It was 6 p.m. on Friday, September 20, 2019, when the police received an emergency call. Some people had found a completely naked body in a nearby field. The patrol command unit arrived at the scene, and upon seeing the body, they were completely astonished. The body had 6 stab wounds and had cuts on the arms, 1 leg, and the abdomen. However, that was not the most terrifying part, but the fact that the eyes and a section of the intestines had been removed. The condition was so terrible that the officers could not identify who it belonged to, although they could determine it was a man. The agents theorized that the motive for the murder could have been related to drug trafficking. This theory was based precisely on the extraction of the eyes from the eye sockets. They believed that the victim had seen something he shouldn't have, or maybe he was a mule carrying drugs in his stomach, and that was why his intestines had been cut. The body was transferred to the forensic office for the corresponding autopsy, where it was determined that it was none other than Iban. The studies also showed that the body presented all types of injuries, including fractures and several cuts. Part of the scalp had also been removed. It was also established that the cuts had been made with a scalpel, and that the attack was sudden, so the victim couldn't even defend himself from his aggressor. Although the body presented a lot of savagery, not everything seemed to be the work of humans. Having been exposed for more than 14 hours, the local birds could have plucked the victim's eyeballs, and stray dogs might have devoured his intestines. The case was investigated as an aggravated homicide. Newspapers and television channels quickly picked up the news, awakening fear among the population. With such a terrible case under his jurisdiction, the prosecutor had no choice but to get to work to find the sinister murderer. After receiving the painful news, Iban's relatives offered their testimony before justice, sharing everything they knew about his life, as anything could help understand the motive for the crime and thus lead to its author. In all the statements, there was a fact that stood out above the rest: the romantic relationship Iban had had with a man. While they did not know his name or surname, they could describe him as a man with dark skin. They also knew that the relationship had not ended well. On one occasion, this man had gone to Iban's house with his wife. Since Iban was not there, he left a message with one of his brothers. The message was very clear. He wanted Iban to stop bothering him. After this revelation, the case took a 180-degree turn. The theory of a drug trafficking problem was completely discarded, and the motive shifted to a possible love triangle. But the testimonies of Iban's relatives alone were not enough. The agents decided to summon some of his colleagues from the first supermarket branch where he worked. A woman and a colleague of Iban confirmed the romantic link between the two men and provided names and specific details. She recounted that everyone at supermarket knew Iban had a relationship with a man who worked as an external restocker named Fernando Ambrosio. Initially, everything was going relatively well, but at some point, they began to fight all the time. The already bad situation escalated even more when they were found being intimate in the supermarket's storage area. The supervisor decided to transfer Iban. The woman took advantage of her statement to emphasize that the young man had been harassed for a long time because of his sexual orientation, not only by his colleagues but also by the supervisor and Fernando himself. With the testimonies collected, the prosecutor no longer had doubts that this man was at least a suspect in the crime. He went along with other agents from the Buenos Aires police to raid his house, and there the doubts turned into certainties. On the street, the officers randomly chose a witness to attest to the procedure, which is extremely necessary in Argentina. Then they entered the home, where they found no element that could contribute to the investigation, nor were there any signs of bloodstains being cleaned. They were about to leave without having obtained any evidence when the witness asked to make a statement. He recounted that on September 20, he had run into Fernando in the street, as they were neighbors. As if it were an ordinary conversation, the man told him that he knew the young man who had appeared dead. He also said that the previous day he had met with him since he had picked him up at his house, and they went together to the river. There, they chatted for a while, until they said goodbye near the stream. After that, he didn't hear from him again until he saw the news. The situation was quite extraordinary. The accused himself had placed himself at the location where the victim's body was found, on the same day he disappeared. The investigators theorized that Fernando probably did this out of fear that some security camera might have captured him, evidenced by the emphasis he had placed on explaining that he left the place while Iban was still alive. However, this testimony was not enough evidence to arrest him. The agents conducted luminal tests in his car in search of bloodstains, but they were negative. By then, they were certain that the crime had been committed Fernando, while they continued looking for clues. Team from the local police began to covertly surveil Fernando, but the intelligence work did not take long, and very soon they found the missing piece of the puzzle. By intercepting his cell phone, they discovered that in the days before the crime, Fernando had communicated with a man named Jonathan, who was called Mosquito, a 42-year-old bricklayer, who was working on his house doing some repairs. Moreover, Fernando had asked him for help with something. On October 4, the officers went to Jonathan's home. When surrounded by agents, the man broke down and decided to tell the whole truth. He said that one day while he was working at Fernando's house, he was offered 3,000 Argentine pesos to help him scare a guy who was bothering him, and Jonathan, who lived off occasional jobs and needed money, accepted without hesitation. On September 19, he received the instructions. He had to hide in the trunk of Fernando's car. From there, they would pick up Iban. The first part of the plan went perfectly. When they parked in the area of the river, Fernando got out of the vehicle with Iban, and they began to argue heatedly. Jonathan heard screams and blows but could not see what was happening. After a few seconds, the noise ceased. Fernando told Jonathan to get out of the car and help him put Iban's body in the trunk. By then, the young man was not breathing. It was not what they had agreed upon, but Jonathan preferred not to ask questions. After wrapping the body, they drove about 300 meters to an open field, took the body out of the car, and dragged it to leave it under a tree. After giving his testimony, Jonathan was detained that same day, and the agents headed to Fernando's home, arriving just in time, as according to intelligence work, the subject was planning to flee to the interior of the country. Following Jonathan's directions, they checked a shed of another house located in a nearby town. There they found various valuable objects that were identified by Iban's relatives, as well as blood-stained clothing. The objects were subjected to forensic tests, and they matched the DNA of the victim. With both accused detained, the agents thought the investigation was closed. But there was still something to be resolved: the motive for the crime. That's when a key testimony appeared, surprising everyone working on the case. Teresa, Fernando's wife, said she wanted to testify before justice. She recounted that at the end of 2016, Iban had contacted her to tell her that he was her husband's lover. This seemed very strange to her, so she decided to have a straightforward conversation with Fernando. He flatly denied it, and she, with all the love she had for him, chose to believe him. They were calm for a while until Iban reappeared. On that second occasion, he sent Teresa images of Fernando without clothes. There was no doubt what Iban was saying was true. The woman decided to separate from her husband, but this only lasted a few days. Fernando swore that his thing with Iban had been a momentary confusion and that it had not gone beyond some chats. He denied that they were a couple or that they had had relations. Again, Teresa chose to trust him, and they reconciled. To prevent Iban from interfering in their marriage, they both decided to change their cell phones and forgot about the issue for a while, as if nothing had happened. However, more than a year later, Iban reappeared in their lives. This time he contacted her via Facebook, sent her photographs and videos where Fernando was seen being intimate with another man. Teresa chose not to give importance to the messages from this man, decided that it was best if the matter remained within the family, and saw Iban as an intruder. She blocked him, but the harassment continued. The man managed to create up to 4 fake accounts per day to send her messages, increasingly aggressive, telling her over and over that she was fat and that Fernando would eventually leave her because he did not love her. That's when they realized that the situation was beyond them and that they could no longer resolve it alone. On April 17, 2019, 5 months before the crime, Teresa went with her husband to file a complaint at the police against Iban for stalking and alleged threats. However, it did not prosper. After hearing this story, the prosecution confirmed that the complaint was real. Fernando also handed over his cell phone so that they could see the messages he had with Iban, where he threatened him, saying that if he left him, he would tell everything to his mother and the rest of his relatives. But this did not serve to free Fernando from trial. Everything indicated that Iban had been murdered in retaliation for the extortion attempts. With both in pre-trial detention, Fernando accused Jonathan of delivering the blow to Iban that took his life. However, the autopsy revealed that the crime was carried out by 2 people. Neither could escape the sentence. In the document prepared for the trial, Fernando was accused of planning and executing the murder of Iban, fearing that Iban would expose his sexual orientation. Jonathan, on the other hand, was accused of being an accomplice for having helped him hide the body. In the same file, the prosecutor carried out a detailed reconstruction of the events, from when Fernando and Iban met in 2016 until the day of the murder. They had started their friendship at the supermarket, and over the months, they became a couple. When Fernando's wife became pregnant, he decided to end things with Iban. Iban did not take this well, threatening him by saying that if he left him, he would tell everything to his mother. They eventually resumed their relationship, but in 2019, Fernando told him it was all over. Iban, completely infuriated, started sending intimate videos and photographs of him to his wife. They filed a complaint at the police station, but it did not prosper. Seeing that Iban's blackmail continued, Fernando contacted Jonathan for help. On September 19, 2019, Fernando sent a message to Iban saying he wanted to meet him, probably lying by saying he wanted to settle things and even resume their romantic relationship. Iban agreed. In the afternoon, Fernando picked him up with his car from downtown and drove to a place where they got out to chat and have some tea. With the excuse of going to get something from the trunk, Fernando left it open. At some point, one of the attackers hit Iban on the head with an iron bar, fracturing his skull. They then proceeded to strip him, cut his neck and abdomen with a scalpel, put him inside a bag, and covered him with a sheet to avoid leaving bloodstains in the vehicle. They then drove to the open field of a nearby river, where they finally placed the body. The prosecutor stated that Fernando took advantage of the trust and love Iban had for him to deceive him into going out. There, along with Jonathan, they took advantage of his defenseless state to murder him and make him suffer, proceeding to beat and stab him savagely on multiple occasions. Both Fernando and Jonathan were accused of aggravated homicide due to the use of a knife, premeditation, cruelty, treachery, and for promise of payment. The additional aggravating factor of being in a romantic relationship was added to Fernando, and the most probable sentence was life imprisonment. The oral trial began on April 8, 2022, and to this day, the case remains open. Forensic studies have not been able to determine whether Ibon died from the severe head injuries or from the 6 stab wounds he received. It has also not been defined which of the 2 accused delivered the fatal attack. Fernando continued to say that he opened the trunk so Jonathan could come out and hit Ibon. Jonathan, for his part, continues to state that Fernando told him to get out of the car once Ibon had already been murdered. The victim's family, distrusting the justice system, fears that the accused may be released. They disagree with certain evidence from the investigation, asserting that Ibon was a calm and introverted person who would never have blackmailed anyone. They emphasized on several occasions that he was harassed both by Fernando and his coworkers due to his orientation. While the messages showed that Ibon threatened Fernando on several occasions, nothing justifies committing a crime. These cases rarely go to trial, and those that do are often archived or dismissed without a sentence for the perpetrators. Ibon's family hopes that the same will not happen and that his death will not go unpunished. On June 15, 2023, Chad Dorman returned home early from work and requested that his 3 sons and wife join him in the primary bedroom for a nap. Sometime after they laid down on the bed, Dorman opened his gun safe and retrieved a rifle. Dorman then shot Hunter twice, killing him. The wife began trying to help Hunter while telling the other 2 sons to run. At this point, the stepdaughter, who was watching television, was entering the bedroom and witnessed the first shots. She ran after Clayton, telling him to keep running. Dorman chased him into a nearby field, shot him from behind, and then point blank in the head. The suspect carried Clayton's body back to the house's yard. The stepdaughter then re-entered the house, picked up Chase, and escaped to the road. Dorman followed her and aimed the rifle at her, telling her to put Chase down. He tried to fire but was out of ammunition. Chase ran to his mother, who was now outside in the yard trying to render aid to Clayton. The stepdaughter got away and informed a passerby what her stepfather was doing before continuing to run towards the nearby Monroe Township Fire Department. Dorman then went inside and carried Hunter's body outside, laying him in the yard. He then tried to wrestle Chase from his wife, reportedly biting her in the process. When she managed to grab the rifle, Dorman fired, shooting his wife in the thumb. She dropped Chase, who Dorman then shot in the head. Dorman then laid Chase's body down next to his brother's and sat on the side stoop of the house, watching his wife try to resuscitate the boys until police arrived at 4:25 p.m. Chad Dorman was born in 1990 in Ohio, USA, and was the cherished only child of Kit and Gloria Doberman. From the start, he was the apple of their eye. Chad had what you'd call a normal childhood. His family was middle class, so he managed to get through elementary and high school without any major issues. He wasn't exactly a standout student, but he got by, passing his classes and staying out of trouble. However, things took a turn once Chad hit adulthood. He started drinking heavily and driving recklessly, which led to numerous traffic tickets and fines. At one point, he even crashed his car and fled the scene, ignoring multiple court summons. The real wake-up call came in 2010 when Chad was accused of domestic violence against his own father. Despite the charges, his father refused to testify against him, not wanting to see his son in trouble, so the case was dismissed. But history repeated itself as Chad faced another domestic violence accusation, this time from a partner. Like before, the case went nowhere because no one would support the charges, holding on to hope that Chad would change. And change he did, at least for a while, after meeting Laura. He fell head over heels for her, unfazed by her having a daughter, Alexis, from a previous marriage. Soon they started a life together, moving to a residential neighborhood in Monroe, Clermont County. The family grew with the arrival of 3 sons, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase. By early 2023, Chad was 32, Laura was 34, Alexis was 16, and the boys were 7, 4, and 3 years old, respectively. The Doormen settled nicely into their peaceful community. In their free time, Clayton and Hunter loved playing baseball. Their coach really liked them and always talked about how energetic and happy they were during practice. He described Hunter as a natural prankster and Clayton as the more serious one, always focused on getting the plays right and cheering on the team. Though both boys shared a love for sports, their other interests varied. Clayton enjoyed building with Lego, riding his go-kart, playing with his dog, and especially taking care of his younger brothers. Hunter, the more adventurous one, was often found playing in the yard, splashing in the creek, or bouncing on the trampoline, always showing lots of affection. Every day, he would tell his mom and sister how much he loved them. Even though Chase was very young, he had already shown a vivid imagination, spending most of his day pretending to be a superhero. The rest of the time, he was glued to Laura, sharing a special bond. The community often spoke of how close the Doorman family was, amazed by their strong connection and shared moments. Yet, behind closed doors, things were quite different. Neighbors frequently heard Chad yelling at Laura and the kids, with hardly a day passing without some outburst. Close friends noticed the situation deteriorating, describing Chad as a ticking time bomb. The abuse escalated to the point where Laura threatened to leave. Despite the turmoil at home, Chad tried to keep up appearances publicly. In June 2023, he updated his Facebook profile picture to one featuring the 3 kids and followed up with more posts, including one from the baseball field where Clayton, Hunter, and Chase gave thumbs ups, suggesting all was well. At the time, the photo raised no alarms and seemed to depict a happy family scene. Those aware of Chad's abusive behavior chose not to intervene, hoping the family situation was improving. On Wednesday, the 14th of the month, the kids had a baseball game. Chad, Laura, and Chase came to support them. After the game, the head of New Richmond Sports Association noticed Chad interacting with the kids, instructing them to get into their car seats, seemingly caring and responsible, which left no suspicion about his true nature. Unbeknownst to everyone, that would be the last time the children were seen alive. The next day, Chad came home early from work, asked his wife and children to join him in the master bedroom for a nap. While the rest of the family was sleeping in the master bedroom, Chad's 12-year-old stepdaughter was watching television in the family room. Once they were all asleep, Chad opened his nightstand drawer, revealing a safe from which he retrieved a rifle. He woke the 3 children and lined them up with Hunter in front. What followed was a horrifying tragedy. Doorman shot Hunter twice, killing him. Laura was awakened by the noise and started screaming in horror. She rushed to Hunter's side and urged her other 2 sons to run. Meanwhile, Alexis, in the next room watching TV, heard the gunshots and ran into the bedroom. She saw her father chasing Clayton and started running after them. The boy raced to a nearby field, but despite his speed, Chad caught up with him, treating it like a hunt. He then shot the boy as he ran, causing him to fall and allowing more time to shoot him again at close range. He then carried the lifeless body back to the house. After witnessing this, Alexis rushed inside to grab Chase, hoping to save him. Her plan was to head for the nearest road, but they never made it out of the house because Chad caught up again. He told Alexis to put down Chase, but she refused. Chad tried to shoot, but the gun clicked empty, out of bullets. Just then, Laura appeared in the yard, trying desperately to revive Clayton, but to no avail. Alexis put Chase down, telling him to run to their mother, saying she would go for help. The little boy ran to Laura's arms for safety. Meanwhile, Chad went back inside to reload his gun and came back to grab his son Hunter. After leaving Hunter in the yard, he tried to snatch Chase from Laura. They struggled, and Chad bit Laura's hand before shooting her in the same spot. She dropped Chase, and Chad took him. He then shot the boy in the head. Satisfied with his actions, Chad placed Chase beside his brothers and sat on the side porch, sinisterly watching as his wife tried in vain to revive the children. It was 4:14 p.m. when Laura realized there was nothing more she could do. She called the police, hysterically screaming that she had lost her babies. The father had fired 9 shots. One boy was shot once. The other 2 were each shot 4 times. Meanwhile, Alexis was running towards the Monroe fire station, screaming for help. A neighbor driving by stopped to ask what had happened. Alexis told her that her stepfather had killed everyone at home. The neighbor offered to take her in the car, but Alexis refused, saying she couldn't leave her family behind, and continued running towards the fire station. The neighbor parked and called the police, recounting Alexis's story. When asked if she could check on the house, she said she didn't want to get close, fearing she might be shot too.
911, where's your emergency?
There's a girl running down the street saying that her stepfather is killing everyone in her family. It's on the corner of where there's a body shop and the fire department. Do you know what road this is?
Okay, what's your name?
Get into the fire department.
What's your name?
Do you know what road this is? Laura Lendell Road.
You said what?
It's Laura Lendell Road.
Okay, and what did the female say to you?
And she says that her stepfather is killing everybody in her house. I did. I'm on the phone with them right now.
Did she say how or what was happening?
I asked her to get in the car with me, and she said she couldn't leave her family.
By this time, 911 operators had received 2 calls about the incident and had alerted the officers, who rushed to the Dorman residence. The neighbors, having heard the shots, were in their yards trying to see what had happened, unaware of the full extent of the tragedy. At 4:30 p.m., the police arrived at the scene. They found Chad calmly sitting on a step outside, rifle in hand, soberly stating he wasn't going to resist arrest and admitting to the crimes, insisting they take him to jail. In this gripping footage from the police body camera, we witness the moment law enforcement apprehends Chad Dorman. The scene unfolds with palpable tension as officers approach, capturing the crucial interaction that led to his arrest. Despite the calm exterior he presents, the gravity of the situation is evident.
Get your hands out of here. 72. Are you copying all this?
Can I roll over? I ain't gonna hurt you. I ain't gonna hurt nobody.
You got anything on you? No, I ain't got nothing.
While Chad was detained, the immediate focus shifted to the 3 children, who were found lying in the yard with gunshot wounds. Paramedics tried to perform CPR, but to no avail. Within minutes, the tragic deaths of the children were confirmed. Attention then turned to Laura, who had a gunshot wound to her hand, not life-threatening. She was rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, screaming at Chad that he had destroyed her life as she was loaded into the ambulance. Chad was arrested smoothly, but as he was about to be placed in the patrol car, He bizarrely warned the arresting officers about the family dog and told the pet to go back inside the house. The property was cordoned off with yellow tape, as officers planned to return the next day for a thorough investigation. That night, Chad was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. When investigators returned to the house the next morning, they found no signs of forced entry, indicating Chad acted alone. In his initial statement, Chad chillingly admitted to having planned the attack on his children since the previous October and revealed he hadn't slept for 3 days leading up to the crime, tormented by the thought of killing his children. On June 16th, Chad made his first court appearance, wearing a padded green vest designed to prevent self-harm, flanked by 6 deputies, indicating concerns he might become unruly. During the hearing, he admitted to lining up his 3 children before killing them. Neighbors' testimonies were presented, with one witnessing Clayton's attempt to escape from Chad. The evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Chad's guilt. His defense requested a $75,000 bail, arguing his long-standing relationship with Laura, lack of stable employment, and community ties made him a low-flight risk. However, prosecutors demanded a $20 million bail, a record-high amount in Ohio, effectively ensuring Chad could not be released. Judge agreed with the prosecution. The Criminal Division of the Clermont County Prosecutor's Office expressed that this was the worst crime he had encountered, condemning Chad's betrayal of his children's trust and need for protection, love, and guidance. He highlighted the brutality of Chad's actions, particularly when he hunted down Clayton. He also criticized the community for ignoring Chad's violent tendencies. The hearing concluded with Chad facing 9 counts of aggravated murder, 1 for each shot fired at his children, plus 8 counts of kidnapping and 4 counts of assault. He was remanded to Clermont County Jail as the investigation continued. On June 23rd, a grand jury indicted Chad on 21 counts, stirring outrage when he pleaded not guilty. Clermont County's prosecutor mentioned that the aggravated murder charges could lead to the death penalty. He argued for the elimination of bail, claiming no sum could match the atrocity of the crime. The case had already garnered extensive media attention, with crowds outside the courthouse demanding swift justice and calling for severe punishment for Chad. Public opinion varied after the hearing. Some agreed with the prosecutor's stance on the death penalty, while others advocated for life imprisonment, insisting Chad fully face the consequences of his actions. However, the consensus was clear. Chad deserved severe punishment. Despite the nationwide backlash, Chad's father still supported him, expressing shock and sorrow in an interview, attempting to rationalize his son's actions as a sudden madness, contradicting Chad's admission of premeditated planning. In contrast, Laura and her family grappled with the fallout. Alexis needed psychological support due to the trauma, and Rachel, the children's aunt, initiated a GoFundMe campaign to cover funeral expenses. She expressed that while the trial might convict Chad, it wouldn't mend their broken hearts, leaving them only memories of the joyful children they once had. On June 25th, the New Richmond Sports Association held a vigil at the baseball field, selling T-shirts to aid Laura's family. Community members visited the Doberman home, leaving toys, candles, and flowers in tribute to the children. A service was held on June 26th at the First Baptist Church for the kids. Laura asked everyone to wear bright, colorful clothes to remember her sons happily. But even with the cheerful colors, you could feel the deep sadness, especially with their friends who just couldn't make sense of the terrible event. During the service, the coach spoke, emphasizing the irreplaceable time spent with the boys and cherishing every moment shared with them. On September 22nd, a pre-trial hearing for Chase was held, setting the trial date for July 8th, 2024, expected to last until August 12th of the same year. It was decided that Chase would remain in custody at the Clermont County Jail with his bail set at $20 million. To this day, the motive behind the crime remains a mystery. No one knows what truly drove Chad to kill his 3 children. Some media suggest he might have been seeking revenge against Laura, who planned to leave him due to his violent behavior towards her and the children. However, Chad has not addressed this theory and continues to withhold cooperation with the investigation. In February 2024, during a court session, Chad Dorman's lawyers requested the judge to dismiss the statements Chad made during his questioning due to certain legal problems and violations. The judge agreed and decided not to consider the confessions Chad made to the police, where he admitted to killing his 3 sons. The judge believed that Chad's rights were not respected after he was arrested.